Feeling lost is a deeply human experience. It doesn't mean failure, weakness, or a mistake. It means something inside us has shifted direction. There are moments when life loses its spark, when familiar paths no longer fit, and silence becomes deafening. But it's in this space of rupture that philosophy begins to reveal itself. Throughout the centuries, thinkers from both the East and the West have faced emptiness, doubt, and suffering, and they left behind maps. This video is an invitation to follow those traces, not to find ready-made answers, but to learn how to walk with more awareness, clarity, and courage. If everything feels like it's falling apart, maybe it's time to rebuild. Not like before, but like never before. I know that I know nothing. And that's exactly where it all begins. How many times have you felt completely lost? As if all the answers that once made sense just disappeared? That feeling of confusion, as uncomfortable as it is, can actually be the starting point of a deep inner journey. And no one understood that better than Socrates. In 5th century BC Athens, surrounded by empty rhetoric and fake certainties, Socrates did the unthinkable. He walked the streets asking questions, not to teach, but to challenge. He would approach people, politicians, craftsmen, poets, priests, and ask, what is justice? What is courage? What is the good? And when they answered confidently, he would gently begin to dismantle, step by step, the false solidity of their ideas. Not to humiliate, but to free them. This method became known as maiutics, from the Greek maiutike, meaning the art of midwifery. Socrates said that just as his mother was a midwife of bodies, he was a midwife of souls, helping people give birth to their own thoughts. But for that birth to happen, one thing was necessary: the willingness to admit that you don't know. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates, according to Plato in Apology. This quote, often repeated, isn't just a criticism of ignorance, it's an existential challenge. If we're living on autopilot, recycling second-hand opinions, clinging to unexamined beliefs, then maybe we're not really living, we're just functioning. That's why Socrates said, I know that I know nothing. But this isn't some fake humility. It's an active, almost radical recognition that real knowledge begins when we drop the ego, when we have the courage to say, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know what it means to live a good life. Today, in a world that rewards quick answers and the appearance of competence, admitting ignorance feels like a weakness. We're surrounded by experts, influencers, coaches, and the constant pressure to know what you're doing with your life. But what if the key isn't in having the answers, but in being brave enough to ask? Socrates wasn't condemned because he lacked knowledge. He was condemned because he made people uncomfortable. He was accused of corrupting the youth and not honoring the gods of the city. But in truth, his real crime was something deeper. He forced the people of Athens to look at themselves, and that shook them. I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything good or beautiful, but he thinks he knows something, while I, knowing nothing, do not think I know. That makes me wiser, because I don't pretend to know what I don't. Plato, Apology of Socrates. That quote isn't just a confession, it's a way of life. Instead of passive ignorance that accepts whatever it's told, Socrates promoted active ignorance, the kind that questions, investigates, and digs for the truth beneath the surface. And what does all this have to do with feeling lost? Everything. Feeling lost isn't a failure. It might be the first sign that you've stopped following a map that wasn't made by you, that you're finally asking, what really makes a life meaningful? In Socratic philosophy, there's no shame in not knowing. The only shame is pretending you do, living on shaky foundations just because they feel comfortable. Socrates teaches us that to truly start over, we must first tear down the illusions. But be careful. This isn't a call to become cynical or passive. Socrates wasn't a nihilist. He believed truth exists, but that it must be earned through dialogue, reason, and honest reflection. If you're going through a moment of crisis, if the old answers no longer work, maybe you're exactly where you need to be. Because it's at the breaking point that real thought begins. Know thyself. Inscription from the Oracle of Delphi, often quoted by Socrates. This phrase, often used lightly, carries a radical demand to turn inward, not for ego, but to recognize your own limits. It's the opposite of the hustle culture we live in. Socrates invites us to start over from the inside, not by changing cities, jobs, or relationships, at least not yet, but by asking, what am I searching for? Why am I suffering? Where is this constant discomfort coming from? And here's the essential point. Recognizing your ignorance isn't the end, it's the beginning. It doesn't mean stopping. It means finally being honest enough to move forward. It's saying, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm ready to ask. I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to think for myself. And today, that's an act of courage. Socratic wisdom is subversive because it gives us back responsibility. We can't outsource our thinking anymore. We can't live on borrowed ideas. Truth, as Socrates said, must be pursued like a lover, with passion, surrender, and vulnerability. So the next time you feel lost, remember, that's exactly where Socrates would begin. He would see your discomfort as an opening, a fertile space. Because deep down, the most honest path might just begin with the question, what if everything I thought I knew isn't quite true? It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Epictetus knew suffering firsthand. Born a slave in the Roman Empire, in a life of extreme external limitation, he experienced what it meant to have control over almost nothing. And yet, or maybe because of that, he became one of the greatest philosophers of inner freedom. Picture this: having no choice, no possessions, no social status, and still believing that true freedom comes from within. It might sound contradictory, but that's the essence of Stoicism. A radical distinction between what depends on us and what doesn't. Some things are up to us, others are not. Epictetus. That one sentence is the foundation of a deeply practical philosophy, and it can also be the foundation for a lighter life, especially when everything seems to be falling apart. So what's up to you? Your opinions, your desires, your actions, your judgments, and what isn't? Other people's health, the weather, the economy, death, the past, the way people behave, the outcome of things. Confusing these two realms is a surefire recipe for suffering. How many times have you blamed yourself for something completely out of your hands? Have you ever felt guilty about a relationship ending, even though you gave it your all? Have you ever been crushed by not being able to change someone, or for not seeing a loss coming? Epictetus would say, you're trying to control the uncontrollable, and that's why you're suffering. He teaches that our anxiety, frustration, and anguish don't come from the events themselves, but from how we relate to them. The mind, trying to control everything, becomes restless. It wants to guarantee outcomes, predict the unpredictable, avoid the inevitable. But that fight against reality is exhausting and pointless. Don't seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Instead, want them to happen the way they do, and your life will flow smoothly. Epictetus. That might sound passive, even like giving up, but it's not. It's not about accepting everything without action. It's about acting where we have power and accepting what we can't control with clarity and dignity. Imagine someone caught in a storm at sea. There are things they can do: adjust the sails, stay focused, protect the boat. But they can't control the wind, the ocean, or the sky. What Epictetus is saying is, put your energy into steering the ship, not into trying to stop the storm. And that is incredibly freeing. Because when you understand this difference, you begin to let go of guilt, resentment, and anxiety. You stop beating yourself up over things no human can change. And at the same time, you begin taking full responsibility for what truly is yours, your values, your choices, your attitude toward life. Here's the great Stoic shift. Being free isn't about controlling the world. It's about not letting the world control you. No one is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. This kind of inner freedom makes it possible to face pain, loss, and failure with courage. Epictetus doesn't promise a life without suffering. He offers a way to walk through suffering without being destroyed by it. And in times of crisis, like many of us are living through, this lesson becomes essential. When we lose a job, face illness, or when life doesn't go as planned, the mind panics, trying to control the outcome. But when you remember Epictetus's words, you can stop and ask, is this within my control? If yes, act with courage. If not, accept with wisdom. But let's be clear, accepting doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing the limits of what can be changed right now. It means not wasting energy on battles that can't be won, and instead using that energy on what can be transformed. Epictetus's philosophy isn't abstract theory. It's practical, daily, grounded. It's a philosophy of survival, but also of transcendence. A compass for anyone who feels lost at sea. That's why he said we must train the mind like athletes train the body. We must repeat these truths until they become internal habits. Because in the chaos of life, serenity is an inside job, and it begins by asking the right question. Want to be invincible? Then don't enter battles where the outcome isn't up to you. Epictetus. It's a lesson that doesn't deny suffering, but puts it into perspective. It teaches us to live more clearly, more lightly, more aligned with reality. Because so much of our pain comes from resisting what is. And once you realize you don't have to control everything to live well, something shifts. Your breathing slows, your mind quiets, and for the first time in a long time, you can simply be. Be someone who accepts, who chooses, who stands firm, who loses, but doesn't get lost. That's freedom. That's living philosophy. The spirit of the camel, the lion, and the child. The path to overcoming nihilism. Do you feel like you're going through a breaking point, as if the meanings that once guided your life just stopped working? Maybe the old ideals don't speak to your heart anymore. What once seemed important now feels hollow. That feeling has a name, and for Nietzsche, it marks the beginning of a profound transformation. That emptiness isn't a sign of weakness. For Nietzsche, it means something old is dying inside you, and a new way of being might be ready to emerge. God is dead. Nietzsche, the gay science. When Nietzsche wrote this, he wasn't celebrating the death of religion, like some people think. He was pointing out a crisis of meaning. The West had lost its faith in absolute truths, in eternal moral structures, and now stood on shaky ground. So what do we do when the old pillars collapse, when certainty disappears? That's when Nietzsche introduces one of the most powerful images in his work, the three metamorphoses of the spirit, an inner journey of transformation that's painful, courageous, and necessary. 1. The camel, the weight. You carry. The first form is the camel. It's strong, disciplined, and silent. Its strength lies in accepting burdens. The camel says, I must. It bows to rules, traditions, and social expectations. It carries what it's told to carry, even if that crushes its individuality. Many people live like this, fulfilling roles they didn't choose, molding themselves to fit other people's expectations, living under the pressure of being what you should be, a good child, a model employee, someone who always does what's expected. And while that might seem noble, the risk is losing yourself in the process. Nietzsche challenges us to notice when this burden no longer makes sense, when obedience becomes a cage, not a virtue, and then something shifts. 2. The lion. the spirit that says no. From the camel comes the lion. The spirit now needs to break free. And to do that, it must learn to say no. No to old values, no to idols, no to imposed rules. The lion is a rebel. It breaks the chains. It refuses to live under inherited truths. This is the moment of resistance, of criticism, of rebellion. But this power is still defensive. The lion knows how to destroy, but not yet how to create. It still needs an enemy to define itself. It's still stuck in a fight against the past. Nietzsche sees this phase as essential, but not enough. The spirit can't stop at rebellion. True freedom isn't just breaking chains, it's being able to create a new path. And that's where the third transformation begins. 3. The child. The birth of something new. The spirit becomes a child, but not just any child. This child symbolizes rebirth, playfulness, creativity, and the ability to forget the past. Now the spirit can say yes, but a pure, innocent, authentic yes. The child is the opposite of resentment. It doesn't live to deny the past, it lives to affirm the future. It turns chaos into play, suffering into art, emptiness into possibility. The child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a wheel that turns on its own. From Nietzsche, thus spoke Zarathustra. This is the hardest transformation because it takes more than strength. It takes courage to not just break things, but to take full responsibility for building your own existence. No crutches, no guarantees, no life manuals. This is where Nietzsche gives us a real escape from nihilism. Overcoming nihilism, creating meaning, where there is none. Nihilism happens when the old meanings die, and nothing new takes their place. It's like walking through a city in ruins. But Nietzsche doesn't tell us to rebuild the past. He says, create something entirely new. Man is something to be overcome. Nietzsche thus spoke Zarathustra. It's not about denying your humanity. It's about transcending the version of humanity that's tame, obedient, and afraid. Becoming something more. Someone who creates values, who says yes to life, even its pain. This is the path of existential rebirth. It means letting go of the version of yourself that only followed others. It means facing the void, not with despair, but as a chance to begin again. It means creating meaning, even when the world offers none. Become who you are. Nietzsche doesn't believe in a fixed essence. For him, being yourself is something you build, not something you find. It's not about digging deep to uncover some hidden truth. It's about sculpting, choosing, affirming. You become who you are through the choices you make. And yes, that means dying to older versions of yourself, dying to the masks, dying to fear, dying to what no longer serves you. But that death is fertile. It's the ground where a new way of living can grow. Nietzsche calls this amor fati, the love of fate. Not as passive acceptance, but as radical affirmation of life as it is. To love not just the good moments, but the mistakes, the pain, the breakdowns, because all of it was necessary to bring you here. I want to learn to see what's necessary in things that are beautiful. I want to be the one who makes things beautiful. Nietzsche, the will to power. That's the deepest task, to make something out of the ruins, to turn pain into power, destruction into raw material, and what looked like the end into a beginning. Nietzsche didn't want followers. He wanted free spirits, brave enough to create. And if you're feeling lost, tired, or broken, maybe this is your chance to leave the camel behind, unleash the lion, and finally play like the child you were always meant to be. Being toward death and anxiety as a path to authenticity. Being lost isn't a mistake that needs fixing. It's a fundamental experience of existence. In Martin Heidegger's philosophy, this sense of disorientation isn't just a sign of crisis. It reveals something deeper about the human condition itself. Heidegger called this way of being Dasein, a German term that literally means being there. Dasein is the being that questions itself, that's thrown into the world and carries the weight of its own mortality. Unlike anything else in the universe, human beings are aware that they exist, and at the same time, that one day they will no longer exist. This awareness isn't intellectual, it's lived, and it shows up in moments of silence, rupture, and crisis, when all distractions lose meaning and the emptiness of existence hits in its rawest form. That's the landscape of existential anxiety. In anxiety, the world loses its familiar colors. Everyday tasks feel strange, words sound hollow. Everything that once made sense begins to unravel, as if there's a background noise you can't ignore anymore. That noise is a quiet reminder of something that's always been there, but that we tend to avoid: death. Heidegger describes the human being as being toward death, Sein zum Tod. This doesn't mean living for death, but recognizing that it is the final horizon of all possibility. Death isn't just a future event. It's a constant presence that silently shapes our entire experience of being. Being toward death reveals the fragility of existence. But that fragility isn't a reason for despair. Quite the opposite. It opens the door to a deeper kind of living. When we understand that time is finite, every moment gains a new weight. Every choice is no longer just another choice. It becomes the choice. That's why anxiety isn't something to avoid. Heidegger sees it as an existential phenomenon that pulls us out of superficiality. It breaks through routine, distraction, and what he calls the they, the impersonal way of living. We say things like, "People do this," or "You're supposed to work like that," or "This is how life is lived." That they is how we avoid owning our existence. In Heidegger's language, this is inauthenticity, living based on what others expect, what's socially accepted, what's easy and comfortable. It's a way of fleeing from freedom, because real freedom demands we take responsibility for our own being. But anxiety has the power to break through that illusion. It disrupts the autopilot. It strips away the masks. It shakes up our certainties. And in doing so, it calls us back to ourselves. It reminds us that no one can die for us. And so, no one can live for us either. This is the foundation of authenticity, recognizing that we're walking toward death. And for that very reason, we need to consciously choose how we want to live. Authenticity isn't a permanent state. It's a continuous attitude toward existence. It's living with the awareness of the end, and because of that, living more truthfully. Heidegger doesn't give formulas. His philosophy isn't about rules. He doesn't tell us how to live. He tells us that it's up to us to decide. From this point of view, being lost is the necessary starting point for finding a path that's truly ours, not inherited, not imposed, not copied. To live authentically is to leave behind the comfort of imitation and face the radical freedom of being. That freedom can be terrifying. It comes with the weight of choice, the uncertainty, the risk. But only in that space can something real emerge. By recognizing being toward death, Dasein frees itself from the distractions of the everyday and begins to take on the task of being itself. That doesn't mean living in isolation or selfishly. It means living with a sense of mortality that guides every gesture, every relationship, every decision. Existence isn't something given, it's something to be built. Heidegger insists that we are a project, not a fixed being, but a possibility that is always unfolding. Death, by placing a limit on life, also makes it urgent. There's no time to waste living a life that isn't truly ours. That's why anxiety shouldn't be repressed. It should be listened to. It's a signal, a message that the automatic life is no longer enough. A push to reclaim responsibility for our own being. Instead of trying to run from the discomfort of being lost, Heidegger invites us to listen to what that loss is trying to say. Because maybe, just maybe, it's in the emptiness that the opening to a new way of existing begins. One that's more awake, more committed, more real. Being authentic doesn't mean being perfect. It means being aware of your mortality, your choices, and the fact that no one else can live your life for you. It means accepting the risk of existence with all its pain and possibility. Heidegger doesn't romanticize anxiety. He simply recognizes it as a necessary part of being human. But instead of numbing it with distractions, he sees it as a compass that doesn't point to a fixed destination, but to a more truthful way of being. So anxiety stops being an obstacle and becomes the passage, and being lost, silently and slowly, becomes the beginning of finding yourself again. Despair as the revelation of the self and the possibility of an authentic new beginning existence isn't neutral. From the very beginning, it's a call to responsibility. Kierkegaard, often called the father of existentialism, saw life not as an objective fact, but as a deeply personal experience. When we're faced with the challenge of becoming ourselves, we inevitably run into inner tension, anxiety. But this isn't everyday stress, it's existential anxiety, the kind that appears when we confront our own freedom. To Kierkegaard, human beings are a mix of finiteness and infiniteness, of necessity and possibility. And it's this ambiguous condition that exposes us to the most fundamental kind of anxiety, having to choose our own path. Every real choice comes with risk, because choosing always means giving up other possibilities. Life doesn't offer a rewind button. Time moves forward, choices stack up, and we shape who we are in the middle of those decisions. Kierkegaard didn't see this as a flaw. He saw it as the ground of authenticity. So, anxiety isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is being born, a new version of the self, a deeper awareness. Those who try to escape this anxiety often lose themselves in superficiality, caught up in distractions or living impersonally. But Kierkegaard goes even deeper. He believed that people often live in despair, not necessarily loud or obvious despair, but a quiet kind, the despair of not being who you truly are. To him, this is the greatest suffering, living your whole life disconnected from your inner truth, doing what others expect of you, going through the motions, hiding the emptiness behind appearances. The greatest danger, the greatest despair, is not being who you really are. Kierkegaard, the sickness unto death despair, he says, is not an accident. It's part of being human. In fact, it's a necessary stage in the journey toward living authentically. Despair acts like a mirror, forcing you to ask the one question you can't avoid: who am I? But facing that question is hard. It hurts. It demands brutal honesty, and that's why many avoid it. They bury themselves in distractions, living on autopilot, as if meaning could be found somewhere out there. But at some point, the illusion collapses. And in that collapse, when the mask falls, lies the possibility of a real new beginning. For Kierkegaard, this new beginning only happens when we accept our human condition in the face of the infinite. It means recognizing that we are flawed, limited, and incomplete, and yet still open to something greater than ourselves. The only way to live within this paradox, he says, isn't through cold logic or pure reason. It's through what he called the leap of faith. But this leap isn't about blindly believing in dogma. It's an inner movement, a free, personal act with no guarantees. It's choosing to jump into the unknown, not because you're sure, but because you choose to trust in spite of uncertainty. The leap of faith doesn't erase anxiety, it goes through it. And in that leap, the self meets something bigger than itself. This leap can't be explained. It can't be taught. Each person has to make it alone. And it only becomes possible when all your efforts to stand on your own fall apart, and you still choose to move forward. Kierkegaard saw this moment as a shift between different stages of life. First comes the aesthetic stage, where people chase beauty, pleasure, and intense experiences. But underneath, it's all a form of escape. Then comes the ethical stage, where responsibility and depth emerge. But still, something is missing. Finally comes the religious stage. And for Kierkegaard, this doesn't mean organized religion. It's about an existential relationship with the mystery of life, with the eternal, the infinite inside us. And that relationship can only happen through faith. Not the kind taught in temples, but faith as the courage to be, despite weakness, doubt, and failure. Faith is precisely this: dying to the world, and yet continuing to live in it. Just Kierkegaard, fear and trembling. This process of symbolic death is what makes space for a truer life. Those who face anxiety and despair, not as enemies, but as revelations, begin to find themselves. Not as something already complete, but as a project, a responsibility. Becoming yourself is a lifelong task, and it only becomes possible when you choose yourself, in front of the vastness of existence. That choice isn't rational. It's existential. It demands faith, in the deepest sense of the word. Kierkegaard's philosophy doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't numb the pain, but it sparks something. The idea that you can begin again. Not from external certainty, but from the courage to stand in the middle of your own abyss. Because in the abyss, there can also be encounter, and in that encounter, authenticity is born. To be lost, for Kierkegaard, is a sign that the soul is searching for something more real. Despair isn't the end. It's a call. An anxiety, far from being a flaw, is a signal that your existence is asking for depth. The leap of faith doesn't eliminate the abyss. It inhabits it. It acknowledges it. And still, it jumps. There is only one truly serious philosophical problem: suicide. Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. There is no comfort, no promise of heaven, no certainty of cosmic justice, no manual, no map. And yet, there is life. Albert Camus doesn't try to soften the discomfort of existence. He offers no metaphysical hope, no absolute answers. What he does with razor-sharp clarity is stare into the void and carve out a yes to life from within it. For Camus, the human condition is defined by a clash between two forces: our deep need for meaning and the silence of the universe. We are creatures who seek purpose, order, and coherence. But the world doesn't respond. It says nothing. It explains nothing. It just is. This tension between our longing and the universe's silence is what Camus calls the absurd. The absurd isn't something out there in the world alone, nor is it only inside us. It arises in the collision between the two. Life feels incoherent because we crave coherence that will never come. And so the most radical question emerges: if life has no inherent meaning, why keep living? Deciding whether or not life is worth living is to answer the fundamental question of philosophy. Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus takes that question seriously, not as a metaphor or poetic idea, but literally. If existence offers only finitude, pain, and a silent world, wouldn't suicide be the logical answer? This is exactly where Camus introduces his philosophy of courage. The absurd should not be eliminated. It should be faced. To eliminate it means falling into one of two traps: physical suicide, destroying one's consciousness to escape the void; philosophical suicide, clinging to belief systems, religions, or ideologies that offer fake comfort just to avoid facing the discomfort of not knowing. Camus rejects both. For him, the only authentic response is revolt, an inner stance of lucid, ongoing, courageous confrontation with the absurd, without denying life. Revolt is the certainty of a crushing fate and the awareness that we are still here. Camus, the rebel. This revolt isn't a scream of despair. It's an act of affirmation. It's choosing to live without needing a reason. It's saying, life has no meaning, and still, I choose to live it, fully, consciously, with dignity. That's real freedom. When we let go of imposed meaning, metaphysical duties, and predestined roles, existence opens up. Nothing has a given purpose, which means everything becomes an act of creation. Camus captures this with the image of Sisyphus, the figure from Greek mythology condemned to endlessly push a boulder uphill, only to see it roll back down, a punishment without glory, without end, without reason. But Camus flips the narrative. We must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy, not because his task has hidden meaning, but because in becoming aware of his absurd condition, Sisyphus turns punishment into choice. He doesn't give in. He pushes the boulder with clarity, with silent rebellion, with a strength that doesn't need hope to persist. This is the turning point in Camus' philosophy. It's not about finding meaning. It's about creating value where there is none. Life is limited, tragic, imperfect, and that's exactly what makes it precious. You don't need an ultimate truth to love, to laugh, to create, to fight. The absurd doesn't block beauty, it amplifies it. Each moment lived with awareness becomes deeper, more vivid, more ours. Camus isn't a pessimist. He's a radical realist with a rebel soul. His philosophy is for those who are tired of illusions but still want reasons to go on. For those who know there's no solid ground and choose to dance anyway. That dance, that bold choice to live with open eyes, is what he calls the absurd lifestyle. Living with no appeal to eternity, no masks, no false ideals. Living with full awareness that everything will pass and still choosing to love. Not because it lasts, but because it exists now. That awareness doesn't bring peace, but it brings a kind of existential honesty. And from that honesty, courage is born. Camus invites us to be like Sisyphus, aware of the emptiness, but still moving forward. Every gesture, every relationship, every thought becomes an act of resistance. Resistance against the urge to give up. Resistance against the easy comfort of ready-made answers. Resistance against living a life that isn't fully lived. The absurd doesn't go away. It won't be solved. But it can be inhabited. It can be embraced. And in that embrace, something greater than meaning might emerge. The dignity of existing on your own terms. You cannot step into the same river twice, for new waters are always flowing over you. Heraclitus of Ephesus. Nothing stays the same, nothing repeats, nothing static survives. For Heraclitus, one of the most mysterious philosophers of ancient Greece, the essence of reality is change. What we call stability is just a temporary illusion, a brief pause within the constant movement of the universe. Everything is in flux. Everything is transforming. This perspective breaks away from the idea that there is some fixed, eternal, and safe order behind reality. For Heraclitus, the world isn't a stable system waiting to be understood, but a living fire, always burning, always remaking itself. Being is not a thing, it's a becoming. Everything flows, Pantarei. This is more than a poetic phrase. It's an ontology, a view of being as process, as movement. Nothing escapes the law of change, not the body, not our emotions, not our thoughts, not even our identity. What we call I is already in the process of dissolving and being reshaped. That's why feeling lost isn't a flaw in existence. It's part of what existence is. Human beings crave stability, control, permanence. But we live in a world where everything changes. This tension between our desire for security and the reality of constant motion is often the root of our anxiety. We try to hold on to people, to phases of life, to versions of ourselves. But everything slips away. Everything passes. Everything dies. Heraclitus invites us to flip this mindset. Instead of resisting the flow, we must learn to live within it. Being lost in this view doesn't mean failure. It means becoming aware of the inevitable movement of life. Crisis, doubt, transformation, they are all part of the process. What feels like chaos may just be the next step in the dance of the universe. The path up and the path down are the same. This seemingly paradoxical statement reveals the logic of Heraclitus's world. Reality is made of opposites that transform into one another. Day and night, health and illness, life and death, all are part of the same fabric, folding and unfolding endlessly. So harmony is not about avoiding conflict, but about the tension between opposites. The universe is held together by a deep structure of dynamic balance, what Heraclitus called the Logos. The Logos is the reason that governs the movement of all things. But this reason isn't static or predictable. It reveals itself in instability, in the fire that burns and renews, in destruction that gives birth to creation. This philosophy asks us to radically change our posture. Instead of chasing what's fixed, eternal, or absolute, we learn to trust the flow. Life stops being a straight line with a set destination and becomes a river, with curves, rapids, and whirlpools. You can't control the entire direction, but you can learn to navigate. When Heraclitus says we can't step into the same river twice, he means that the river has changed, and so have we. Each moment is unique, each encounter is unrepeatable, and that demands a different kind of awareness, a living attention to the now, because now is all there really is. Not as a frozen point in time, but as a flame that burns and moves without rest. So being lost becomes a valid state, a point within the flow. The real issue isn't being lost, it's believing we're not supposed to be. That expectation of stability is what traps us. We want to stop the river to rest, but it's the very movement that sustains life. Fear of change distances us from reality, and the more we resist, the more we suffer. Heraclitus doesn't preach resignation. He teaches wisdom, a wisdom born from watching nature deeply. Everything changes, and that's inevitable. What's left for us is to learn how to live with impermanence, not against it. This wisdom is not passive, it's creative adaptation. It's the ability to transform alongside life. It's not about losing your identity. It's about understanding that identity itself is a process. To be who you are is to always be becoming. Change stops being a threat and becomes the space where meaning can arise. If nothing is fixed, then everything is possible. Every loss can become an opening. Every ending can become a new beginning. Fire lives the death of air, and air lives the death of water. Life feeds on the death of what came before. Life feeds on impermanence. This philosophy, ancient yet radical, feels incredibly relevant today. In a time where we obsess over stability, status, absolute truths, emotional guarantees, Heraclitus reminds us that flow is inevitable. And maybe true maturity lies in making peace with that, in learning to say yes to what shifts, to what slips through our fingers, to what is reborn in unexpected ways. And when everything feels uncertain, when the ground feels too unstable, maybe the wisest thing isn't to fight the current, but to take a deep breath and go with it. Meaning may not be waiting at the final destination, but in the way we choose to dance with the river. Feeling lost can mean being trapped in the shadows. Starting over requires seeing the light. The visible world isn't always the true world. To truly see, in the deepest sense, isn't just about using your eyes. It's about understanding with your soul. For Plato, the worst kind of prison isn't made of walls or chains. It's made of illusions. It's living trapped inside your own mind without even knowing you're stuck. This is the powerful image behind the allegory of the cave, presented in his book, The Republic. More than just a philosophical metaphor, it's an existential mirror, a reflection of those living confined to false realities, repeating empty routines, unaware that what they call reality is just a projection on the wall. Plato paints the scene. Human beings, chained since birth inside a dark cave. They face the back wall, seeing only the shadows of objects passing behind them, lit by the glow of a fire. Having never seen anything else, they believe those shadows are reality. They don't question it. They don't doubt. They live in a world of images, appearances, and imitations. That cave represents the everyday state of human consciousness, a kind of ignorance that doesn't even know it's ignorant. Being lost in this sense means not realizing you're in the dark. It means mistaking the comfort of the familiar for the truth. It's living under ideas you never truly chose. You just absorbed them. And worse, believing that's all there is. The story intensifies when one of the prisoners somehow breaks free from the chains. At first, the firelight hurts. It's uncomfortable. He hesitates. He's afraid of the unknown. But something pushes him forward. And when he finally steps outside the cave, the sunlight blinds him. He can't make sense of what he sees. It's painful. He wants to go back. But little by little, his eyes adjust. And for the first time, he truly sees. Education is the process of leading the soul from darkness into light. The sunlight outside the cave represents the world of ideas, truth, goodness, and what's real. For Plato, everything we see in the physical world is just a flawed copy of something higher and more lasting. What's visible is temporary. What's invisible, like justice, beauty, and values, is eternal. So waking up, becoming conscious, means going from surface to depth, from passive habits to real thought, from illusions to truth. It's about learning to look past the obvious. But this process isn't easy. It takes effort. It takes letting go. It takes the courage to admit that much of what you once believed was just a reflection, not the real thing. That's why so many people choose to stay in the cave. Darkness may be uncomfortable, but it's familiar. The light, on the other hand, demands change. And there's something even harder. The freed prisoner feels the need to go back into the cave to help others get out. He wants to share what he's seen. He wants to help. But when he returns, he's met with laughter and rejection. The others say he's lost his mind, and if he keeps insisting, they might even try to kill him. This part of the myth reveals something crucial. Truth is uncomfortable. It shakes things up. People who begin to see differently often become outsiders, misfits who no longer fit the old mold. That's why the path of awareness is often lonely. Even so, Plato insists, a true new beginning can only happen once you've left the cave. Feeling lost in that case might be the first sign that your chains are loosening. That strange feeling of disconnect from the ordinary world might be the beginning of the philosophical journey. Doubt is the first step toward waking up. So starting over isn't just about changing direction. It's about changing how you see. It's realizing the shadows were never real, that the world of appearances is shallow, that something deeper exists, even if it's hard to reach, even if it requires you to retrain the eyes of your soul. Plato's philosophy is, above all, a calling. Not a call to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. True freedom isn't just getting out of the cave. It's being aware that the cave exists, and that awareness changes everything. The goal of education is to teach people to see what is, not just what seems to be. In the myth, there are no guarantees, no promise of a happy ending. Going back into the cave is dangerous. Living in the light isn't easy, but the awakening is worth it. Because once your soul is touched by the light, you can't be satisfied with shadows anymore. And that changes everything. When everything feels empty, it might be a call to something beyond. There's an emptiness in the human heart that seems impossible to fill. It doesn't matter how much you have, how much you achieve, or how much you understand. That space remains open, quiet, restless. For Blaise Pascal, a 17th century philosopher, mathematician, and religious thinker, this emptiness isn't a flaw in human nature. It's not a mistake to be fixed. It's a sign that human beings were made for something greater than what the world can offer. Pascal knew suffering firsthand. He endured chronic pain, the loss of loved ones, and the internal battle between reason and faith. His philosophy was born from that tension, between the finite and the infinite, between the fragility of life and the possibility of eternal meaning. Man infinitely surpasses man. This sentence captures a key tension in Pascal's thought. Human beings are both magnificent and miserable. We can measure the stars, but we're powerless against death. We have reason, but we're ruled by our desires. We're stuck between two abysses, one of greatness and one of collapse. Pascal didn't romanticize the human condition. He saw it with brutal clarity. We suffer. We run from ourselves. We drown in distractions to avoid facing our inner silence. He believed that beneath all the noise of the world, there's a deep cry from the soul, a longing for something the world simply can't give. There is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of man. This isn't a dogmatic statement. It's not about forcing belief. What Pascal reveals is a universal human experience, the presence of an infinite desire inside each of us, a longing for wholeness, for true peace, for meaning that lasts. And every finite thing, wealth, power, pleasure, knowledge, ultimately fails to satisfy that hunger. The world offers substitutes, constant motion, entertainment, success. But Pascal saw this as diversion, not in the modern sense of fun, but in the original sense of diverting us from what matters most. He observed that people would rather stay busy than stop and face themselves. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. That room is the space of inner confrontation, and it's there that the experience of the hidden God begins to emerge. For Pascal, God does not force himself on us. He doesn't prove himself the way a math formula can be proven. God hides, not out of cruelty, but because a real relationship with him requires freedom and sincerity. Someone who searches only for rational proof may never find him, but someone who listens to the silence of the heart may feel a subtle, intimate call, not logical, but undeniable. This hidden God shows up in our moments of anguish, not as a quick fix, but as a quiet presence inside the absence, not through loud declarations, but through gentle sighs, not as certainty, but as a possibility that speaks directly to our soul. What Pascal offers isn't blind faith, it's radical openness to mystery. He accepts that reason has limits, that human thought can't reach everything. And that's where faith begins, not by rejecting reason, but by stepping beyond it. The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know. This is one of Pascal's most famous and most misunderstood phrases. He's not dismissing logic. After all, he was a brilliant mathematician. What he's saying is that there's a kind of knowing that doesn't come from the mind. It's intuitive, existential, emotional. It comes from the heart, not just the feelings, but the core of who we are. It's in the heart that the emptiness is felt, and it's there that the call to something higher can be heard. Starting over, then, isn't about chasing new answers. It's about honestly listening to your own inner hunger. Pascal doesn't ask for emotional conversion or a blind leap. He invites us to take a stand in the face of doubt, to engage with the mystery of being human. He's known for Pascal's waga, the idea that, in the face of uncertainty, the most reasonable bet is to live as if God exists. Because if God doesn't exist, you've lost nothing. But if he does, and if he is the answer to that deep emptiness, you gain everything. This isn't a cold calculation. It's a philosophical provocation. It's the recognition that there's more wisdom in opening yourself to the unknown than in rejecting it out of pride. The emptiness in the heart isn't something to rush to fill. It's something to listen to, with reverence. Because that emptiness might be the echo of something sacred inside you. And if you listen closely enough, you might realize that what felt like absence was actually presence in disguise. Pascal doesn't promise perfect happiness. What he offers is a path of depth, a path that moves through silence, doubt, and mystery, but also offers a kind of peace that the world can't give, a peace that comes from reconciling with the infinite. So when everything feels empty, maybe it's time to stop searching outside and start listening to what's quietly calling from within. That emptiness might not be a void after all, but an opening. Finding harmony with the order of nature can help you redefine your place in the world. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from escape or victory, a peace that doesn't depend on what's happening outside, but on how you understand what is. That's the kind of peace Baruch Spinoza invites us to discover, a harmony with the deep order of the universe, with what he called Deus sive natura, God or nature. For Spinoza, God isn't a being separate from the world, nor a force that intervenes from outside. God is the world. God is nature. God and nature are one and the same, infinite, eternal, and necessary reality. By God, I mean a being absolutely infinite. That is, a substance consisting of infinite attributes, each of which expresses eternal and infinite essence. With this radical idea, Spinoza breaks away from the traditional view of a moralistic, human-like God. He doesn't believe in divine rewards or punishments. There is no will of God separate from the structure of reality. What exists is the unchanging order of natural laws, governing everything from the movement of stars to human thoughts. This order doesn't exist to please us. It just is. It doesn't bend to our wishes. It doesn't adjust to our emotions. But it can be understood. And in this act of understanding, Spinoza finds the key to inner freedom and transformation. To him, freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's understanding why you want what you want. It's about knowing the causes that move you, where your emotions, reactions, and impulses come from. A person who's unaware of these causes is a slave to their own feelings. But someone who understands, even partially, how things work begins to set themselves free. The free person, that is, one who lives according to the guidance of reason, is not led by fear of death, but directly desires the good. This reason isn't cold or disconnected. It's reason grounded in reality, sensitive to the necessity of things. Spinoza called it the intellectual love of God, a state of awareness where a person recognizes they are part of a greater whole, and everything that exists has its place within it. In this view, suffering often comes from the illusion of separation, from believing we are isolated, disconnected, from wanting the world to bend to our will. But when we understand that everything is connected, that everything follows a necessary order, even if it's beyond our full understanding, a deeper sense of acceptance arises, a kind of peace. Spinoza doesn't deny pain or sadness, but he offers a way to transform them. In his theory of emotions, he distinguishes between passive emotions, which control us, and active emotions, which come from true understanding. Moving from a passive life to an active one requires rational awareness of causes, and this awareness expands our power to live. Blessedness is not the reward of virtue, but virtue itself. That line is crucial. Spinoza doesn't see happiness as a prize waiting at the end of some moral journey. For him, living with reason is already living with joy. Understanding the order of the universe doesn't pull us away from life. It brings us into it more fully, more clearly, more calmly. This changes the role of the individual. In Spinoza's view, the human being isn't a center of absolute free will, but a part of the great web of existence. We are only as free as we understand what influences us. And as we begin to understand, we stop fighting the inevitable and start cooperating with life. That cooperation isn't submission, it's maturity. It's realizing that the world doesn't revolve around me, but that me can find its place in the world. Spinoza gives us an ethics of active joy, inner strength, and rational connection with the whole. And this only becomes possible when we give up our need for control, for absolute security, or external promises of salvation. Being lost, from this perspective, might simply mean you haven't yet understood your place in the bigger picture. Inner chaos often reflects a lack of clarity about the structure of the world. And the more you understand this order, even just a little, the more you find a path inward. Starting over doesn't happen because the world changes. It happens because your view of the world changes. The transformation isn't in your circumstances, it's in your awareness. This awakening doesn't require blind faith or mystical revelations. It asks for attention. Deep, honest, patient attention. It takes the willingness to let go of illusions and accept that life, even when it's hard, is part of a bigger logic. A logic that may not be shaped in our image, but can be understood by our reason. Inner peace comes from understanding causes, and in that understanding, suffering shifts. Chaos takes form. Pain dissolves, not because it disappears, but because it stops having control. The person who walks with nature isn't someone who gives in to randomness. It's someone who recognizes the order of the universe as the same substance they themselves are made of. And in that recognition, they find themselves. And they find, too, a freer, wiser way to exist. Suffering as a starting point, detachment as liberation. Everything begins with recognizing suffering. No sugarcoating, no illusions, no running away. When Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, stepped outside the palace walls where he had been raised, he came face to face with a reality that had been hidden from him: aging, sickness, death, and pain. That discovery wasn't just a personal shock. It was the awakening of a universal truth. Life, as most people live it, includes dukkha. The word dukkha in Pali doesn't translate perfectly into English. It's often translated as suffering, but its meaning goes deeper. It includes dissatisfaction, discomfort, instability, tension. It's that constant sense that nothing lasts, that everything slips through your fingers, that what you want is never fully enough. Or when it is, it quickly fades away. For Buddha, not seeing this truth is living in a kind of sleep. Suffering is inevitable, but ignorance about it is optional. Freedom begins when we stop denying suffering and start understanding it deeply. That's why his first noble truth is so direct. Life is dukkha. But the teaching doesn't end there. He doesn't say that life is only pain or that we're doomed to suffer forever. He shows that suffering has causes, and that means it can be overcome. According to Buddha, the root cause of suffering is attachment. Attachment to pleasure, to control, to ideas, to identity, to expectations. We want things to last. We want the good moments to never end. We want people to be the way we imagine them. We want our bodies not to age, our minds not to waver. But reality is different. Everything changes. Everything slips away. Attachment is the root of suffering. Buddha. That attachment comes from an illusion, the belief that there is something permanent in the world or in ourselves. But everything that exists is in constant change. What Buddha teaches is not to reject the world, but to see it clearly as it truly is. And that kind of vision is liberating. However, this freedom doesn't come through denial or extreme discipline. That's why Buddha rejected the two extremes he experienced in his own life. First, the pursuit of sensory pleasure, a life of luxury and distraction. Then, the harsh path of self-denial, extreme asceticism that rejects all comfort. Neither path leads to wisdom. That's why he taught the middle way. The middle way is not mediocrity, it's balance. It's the art of living with awareness without getting lost in extremes. It's about accepting impermanence without falling into despair. Being present without clinging to what passes. This path is laid out in the Four Noble Truths, the core structure of Buddhist teaching. Dukkha, the truth of suffering. Samudaya, the cause of suffering is craving and attachment. Nirodha, suffering can come to an end. Magga, there is a path to the end of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is a set of ethical, mental, and meditative practices that lead to freedom. It includes wisdom, right view, and right intention, ethical conduct, right speech, action, and livelihood, and mental discipline, right effort, mindfulness, and concentration. But more than a checklist, this path is a transformation of how we live and see the world. It begins with an honest look inward. The practice of mindfulness, sati, invites us to observe every thought, every feeling, every emotion, without getting caught up in them. The mind stops being a battlefield and becomes a place of quiet observation. In that space of awareness, detachment begins to rise, not as rejection of life, but as freedom from dependency, to love without possessing, to act without being attached to the results, to live without demanding that life follow a perfect script. In what you cling to, there lies fear. For the one who owns nothing, there is no fear. Buddha. Detachment is not indifference, it is freedom. It means not being pulled by every craving. It's being in the world without being trapped by it. And this freedom brings deep compassion. Because when you recognize your own pain, you also begin to recognize the pain of others. The ego slowly dissolves, and in place of a separate me, a broader, more connected awareness begins to emerge. This is the deeper meaning of Buddhist liberation. It's not escaping the world, but being fully present in it, with wisdom and compassion. Nirvana, far from being a place, is a state of non-attachment, where the fire of desire no longer burns the mind. Suffering then transforms. It doesn't vanish completely. Pain is still part of the human condition, but it loses its grip. It loses its weight. And what once felt like a prison becomes a path. The middle way is, above all, an invitation to lightness. Not the shallow lightness of distraction, but the deep lightness of someone who no longer needs to cling to anything in order to live well. Someone who has learned to rest in impermanence. From this perspective, feeling lost might actually be the beginning of waking up. It might mean that the false securities have started to fall apart, and in that silent, empty space, a chance arises to see clearly, to begin again, not from the outside, but from within. Buddha didn't offer magical salvation. He offered a path, a simple, demanding, quiet path, a path that starts with one gesture, to look at suffering and not run from it, because it's right there, in the heart of pain, that freedom begins. Suffering as a starting point, detachment as liberation. Everything begins with recognizing suffering, no sugarcoating, no illusions, no running away. When Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, stepped outside the palace walls where he had been raised, he came face to face with a reality that had been hidden from him: aging, sickness, death, and pain. That discovery wasn't just a personal shock, it was the awakening of a universal truth. Life, as most people live it, includes dukkha. The word dukkha in Pali doesn't translate perfectly into English. It's often translated as suffering, but its meaning goes deeper. It includes dissatisfaction, discomfort, instability, tension. It's that constant sense that nothing lasts, that everything slips through your fingers, that what you want is never fully enough. Or when it is, it quickly fades away. For Buddha, not seeing this truth is living in a kind of sleep. Suffering is inevitable, but ignorance about it is optional. Freedom begins when we stop denying suffering and start understanding it deeply. That's why his first noble truth is so direct. Life is dukkha. But the teaching doesn't end there. He doesn't say that life is only pain or that we're doomed to suffer forever. He shows that suffering has causes, and that means it can be overcome. According to Buddha, the root cause of suffering is attachment. Attachment to pleasure, to control, to ideas, to identity, to expectations. We want things to last. We want the good moments to never end. We want people to be the way we imagine them. We want our bodies not to age, our minds not to waver. But reality is different. Everything changes. Everything slips away. Attachment is the root of suffering. Buddha. That attachment comes from an illusion, the belief that there is something permanent in the world or in ourselves. But everything that exists is in constant change. What Buddha teaches is not to reject the world, but to see it clearly as it truly is. And that kind of vision is liberating. However, this freedom doesn't come through denial or extreme discipline. That's why Buddha rejected the two extremes he experienced in his own life. First, the pursuit of sensory pleasure, a life of luxury and distraction. Then, the harsh path of self-denial, extreme asceticism that rejects all comfort. Neither path leads to wisdom. That's why he taught the middle way. The middle way is not mediocrity, it's balance. It's the art of living with awareness without getting lost in extremes. It's about accepting impermanence without falling into despair. Being present without clinging to what passes. This path is laid out in the Four Noble Truths, the core structure of Buddhist teaching. Dukkha, the truth of suffering. Samudaya, the cause of suffering is craving and attachment. Nirodha, suffering can come to an end. Magga, there is a path to the end of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is a set of ethical, mental, and meditative practices that lead to freedom. It includes wisdom, right view, and right intention, ethical conduct, right speech, action, and livelihood, and mental discipline, right effort, mindfulness, and concentration. But more than a checklist, this path is a transformation of how we live and see the world. It begins with an honest look inward. The practice of mindfulness, sati, invites us to observe every thought, every feeling, every emotion, without getting caught up in them. The mind stops being a battlefield and becomes a place of quiet observation. In that space of awareness, detachment begins to rise, not as rejection of life, but as freedom from dependency, to love without possessing, to act without being attached to the results, to live without demanding that life follow a perfect script. In what you cling to, there lies fear. For the one who owns nothing, there is no fear. Buddha. Detachment is not indifference, it is freedom. It means not being pulled by every craving. It's being in the world without being trapped by it. And this freedom brings deep compassion. Because when you recognize your own pain, you also begin to recognize the pain of others. The ego slowly dissolves, and in place of a separate me, a broader, more connected awareness begins to emerge. This is the deeper meaning of Buddhist liberation. It's not escaping the world, but being fully present in it, with wisdom and compassion. Nirvana, far from being a place, is a state of non-attachment, where the fire of desire no longer burns the mind. Suffering then transforms. It doesn't vanish completely. Pain is still part of the human condition, but it loses its grip. It loses its weight. And what once felt like a prison becomes a path. The middle way is, above all, an invitation to lightness. Not the shallow lightness of distraction, but the deep lightness of someone who no longer needs to cling to anything in order to live well. Someone who has learned to rest in impermanence. From this perspective, feeling lost might actually be the beginning of waking up. It might mean that the false securities have started to fall apart, and in that silent, empty space, a chance arises to see clearly, to begin again, not from the outside, but from within. Buddha didn't offer magical salvation. He offered a path, a simple, demanding, quiet path, a path that starts with one gesture, to look at suffering and not run from it, because it's right there, in the heart of pain, that freedom begins. Rebuilding the self means reclaiming your ethical role in human relationships. Starting over isn't just a private decision, it's also a reconstruction in the space between us. For Confucius, the crisis of the individual can't be separated from the crisis in our relationships. There is no self without the other, and there is no inner harmony without harmony with the world around us. The philosophy of Confucius, born in 5th century BCE China, doesn't talk about renouncing the world or finding solitary enlightenment. It speaks of something quieter, more everyday, and perhaps for that reason, even more powerful. To live well is to live with integrity. And to live with integrity is to act with respect, awareness, and humanity in every relationship we have. The essence of knowledge is, once acquired, to use it with integrity. According to Confucius, the world falls out of balance when people forget their place in human relationships, when they act solely out of personal desire, unchecked ego, or ambition. Inner disorder grows when there's disorder in the way we treat others. And the opposite is also true. By cultivating ethics in our relationships, we begin to restore order in our own hearts. This is the Confucian path to starting over, rebuilding the self through a renewed commitment to others, not as submission, but as responsibility, not as denial, but as maturity. Confucius saw existence as deeply relational. For him, we become human through relationships, with family, community, and society. We're not born ready, we become. And we don't become who we are in isolation. Identity is shaped by how we carry ourselves in relation to others. In this process, one central virtue stands out. Ren, a term hard to translate, but often understood as humanity, benevolence, or deep ethical love. Ren is the heart of Confucian philosophy. It's the ability to recognize the dignity of others and act with empathy, respect, and fairness. The superior person cultivates Ren. He wishes for others what he wishes for himself. Confucius, Analects. Ren isn't a fleeting emotion. It's a constant choice. It's the decision not to harm, not to humiliate, not to place yourself above others. It's about showing up with presence, even in small gestures, speaking kindly, listening fully, caring without expecting anything in return. It's realizing that no true virtue exists outside of human relationships, but the cultivation of Ren begins within. The order we want to see in the world must begin with inner order. For Confucius, that means constantly refining your character, overcoming selfish impulses, and becoming someone worthy of trust, first with yourself, then with others. This process requires discipline. Confucius didn't believe in instant change, but in steady practice. He taught that the path of virtue is like sharpening a blade. It takes time, patience, and repetition. It's not enough to understand what's right. You have to live it in your habits. And that's where another essential concept comes in: Li, often translated as rituals, customs, or proper conduct. Li isn't just about formal ceremonies. It's about how you act in every situation, how you greet someone, how you sit at the table, how you handle conflict. Practicing Li means living with attentiveness. It's not reacting on autopilot. It's turning everyday life into a space for expressing virtue. The simple becomes sacred when done with awareness, cultivating yourself to be an example. That is the root of all good leadership. Confucius, and this leadership isn't just about politics or power. Confucius believed each person is responsible for maintaining harmony in the whole. At home, in the neighborhood, at work, in private life, it's all connected. Who you are on the inside is reflected in how you relate to others. That's why true renewal isn't just personal. It's ethical, communal, and relational. The modern crisis of self often stems from the illusion of absolute independence. The idea that you can find peace without committing to anyone. But for Confucius, that's not freedom. It's isolation. And isolation, when it drags on, breeds alienation, vanity, and dehumanization. To find meaning in life again, we must reconnect with others in real, meaningful ways. We must embrace our relationships as a path to growth. Care even when no one is watching. Speak truthfully even when silence would be easier. Listen deeply without rushing to respond. This is the foundation of the Confucian restart. A return to what matters. A return to integrity. A return to shared humanity. When everything feels directionless, Confucius doesn't tell us to run away or wait for sudden enlightenment. He invites us to look closer to how we treat those who cross our path, to how we keep our commitments, to how we practice virtue, even in the smallest details. What defines us isn't what happens on the outside. It's how we act within the ordinary flow of daily life. And it's in that space, in the ethical gesture, the fair word, the mindful presence, that the self is rebuilt. Slowly, yes, but truthfully. The illusion of the self as the root of suffering, liberation through self-knowledge. What you call I might just be an idea, a mental construction, a conditioned reflection of memories, desires, fears, attachments. For Adi Shankara, the great Advaita Vedanta philosopher, that assumption is the root of nearly all human suffering. Not because the self is evil, but because it's an illusion. And from that illusion, we build an entire life trying to protect, assert, and defend something that was never real. Shankara lived in 8th century India and is known for organizing and expanding the Advaita Vedanta tradition, one of the most profound and radical schools of Indian philosophy. Advaita means non-duality, and Vedanta refers to the final teachings of the Vedas, the oldest scriptures in India. The core idea of Advaita Vedanta is clear. There is only one ultimate reality, Brahman. Everything we perceive as separate, multiple, individual, is Maya, illusion. And among those illusions, the strongest is the belief in a separate self. You are not this body, nor this mind. You are the eternal, the unchanging, the formless. You are Brahman. This might sound distant, even mystical, to the modern Western mind. But it doesn't require belief. It requires deep inquiry. Shankara doesn't ask for blind faith. He invites contemplation. He proposes a method of self-inquiry called neti, a Sanskrit phrase meaning, I am not this nor that. Each time you say, I am my name, neti. I am my thoughts, neti. I am my body, neti. I am my emotions, my roles, my achievements, neti. All of these change, all of these come and go. None of them can be your true self. What you truly are cannot be denied, changed, or destroyed. It is beyond time, form, and individuality. What remains when all identifications fall away is pure awareness, the silent witness that observes everything, but is none of what it observes. This awareness isn't yours. It just is. It doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. Shankara says this awareness is identical to Brahman, the absolute, the infinite, the real in itself. It's not a piece of God inside of you. It is reality itself, seen without distortion. Tat tvam asi, you are that. This realization isn't intellectual. It's not something you understand. It's something you recognize. And that recognition changes everything. Because suffering is born from the belief in a separate self. This I feels threatened, wants validation, fears disappearing. It clings to the body, to ideas, to relationships, and suffers when it loses them. It wants to control, possess, define, and the more it tries to assert itself, the more it creates tension, conflict, frustration. But the self that suffers is the illusory one, the temporary persona created by the mind and fueled by ignorance. For Shankara, that ignorance has a name, avidya, not knowing your true nature. And liberation only happens when that ignorance dissolves in the light of self-knowledge. To be free, then, is not to become a better version of yourself. It's not about improving your ego, controlling your emotions, or purifying your desires. It's realizing that the ego was never your true self to begin with. That's the final liberation, moksha. Not a state to be reached in the future, but a truth that already is, waiting to be uncovered. When ignorance is destroyed, the self shines by itself. Adi Shankara. This realization brings peace, not because it promises constant happiness, but because it lifts the burden of identifying with what is always changing. There's no more struggle to protect your identity, no more attachment to experiences, no more fear of death, because what you truly are was never born. But this realization can't be forced. It unfolds in silence. It requires contemplation, inner listening, letting go of fixed ideas. It's a gradual return to what is simple, what has always been here. Shankara doesn't reject the world. He acknowledges the world of names and forms, but sees it as a temporary appearance of the one reality. Everything that happens, happens in Brahman. The mistake is in taking the part for the whole, the appearance for the essence, the form for the truth. Living from this awareness doesn't mean abandoning practical life. It means living with clarity, seeing the body as a tool, not an identity. Seeing thoughts as movements of the mind, not as absolute truths. Seeing emotions as passing clouds, not the sky itself. Being lost on this path might be a sign that old certainties are beginning to break down. That the search for a solid, stable, permanent self is starting to exhaust itself. And that's a good sign. Because for Shankara, the self you're trying to find was never lost. It was just covered by layers of ignorance. Starting over, then, doesn't mean creating something new. It means recognizing what was always here. The silence behind your thoughts, the presence behind all forms, the self that is pure, complete, indivisible, and that you already are. Being lost in the world is being lost in your own mind. Zazen is the way back to the present. Dogen Zenji, a 13th century Japanese master, wasn't searching for grand ideas or unreachable truths. His teaching was direct, quiet, and radically simple. Sit, breathe, be here. That's the core of his philosophy. Zazen, silent meditation with no object, no intention, no effort. Just being present. For Dogen, the real problem of existence isn't the world itself. It's the mind that has lost touch with itself. We're always running toward the past, the future, fantasies, worries. We live as if real life is always somewhere else, at some other time. And while we chase that illusion, the present moment slips by, unnoticed. And yet, it's the only thing that truly exists. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This quote captures the paradox of Zen. Spiritual seeking isn't about finding something out there. It's about returning to what's already here. But to find this here, we have to let go of the mind that's always trying to get somewhere. That's Dogen's teaching. The real practice isn't about gaining anything. It's about unlearning the habits of distraction. From this view, being lost means being caught in non-stop thoughts. Thoughts about how life should be, memories that pretend to be facts, expectations that never come true. The mind builds a world and then traps us inside it. Dogen doesn't tell us to escape the mind. He invites us to return to it, deeply. And that return happens through the body, the breath, and full presence. That's what Zazen offers. Sit in silence. Keep your spine straight, eyes open, and just be. There's no goal, no secret technique, nothing to achieve. To sit in meditation is enlightenment. This one line turns the whole idea of spiritual progress upside down. Dogen breaks with the belief that we need to become something different. To him, we already are what we're looking for. The practice isn't the path to enlightenment. It is the expression of it. Each conscious breath is a return. Each quiet moment is an opening. Each mindful action is a flower blooming in ordinary life. That's why Dogen says Zen isn't separate from daily life. Cooking, sweeping, serving tea, getting dressed, all of it can be practice. Anything can become a temple, if done with presence. Everyday life for Dogen isn't something dull. It's sacred ground where awareness can bloom. And mindfulness isn't passive. It's a way of living with depth and humility. Don't think what you're doing is insignificant. Everything is practice. This wisdom matters now more than ever in a noisy world. We live with too much information, too much stimulation, too many expectations. Our minds jump from thought to thought like restless monkeys. And in that chaos, we forget how to be here, now. But the present is where life actually happens. It's where peace becomes possible. It's where the true self can be found, not as a fixed identity, but as pure presence. Zazen isn't meditation in the usual sense. It's letting go of control. It's letting thoughts come and go, without holding on to any of them. It's allowing the mind to show itself as it really is. Sometimes cloudy, sometimes clear, always open. To someone seeking deep answers, this practice might seem too simple. But that's exactly what makes it powerful. Because it demands surrender. Not passive surrender, but surrender to reality. To what's here. Now. Unfiltered, unedited, unresisted. Dogen reminds us, you don't need some big external shift to start over. It begins the moment you stop running, the moment you realize you're already where you need to be. You just didn't notice yet. Being lost then is simply being distant from your own presence. And the way back starts with the simplest of gestures. Sit, breathe, observe, no judgment, no expectations, no goals. In that silence, a quiet clarity begins to rise. The body softens, the mind slows down, time opens up, and you realize there's nowhere else to go. Home was always here, in the center of now. This is Dogen's silent revolution, a philosophy not explained in words, but lived through practice. One that doesn't chase answers in mountaintops, but finds them at the kitchen sink, in each careful step, each humble action. When we understand that daily life is the way, there's no longer a separation between practice and life. Zen doesn't promise the end of pain. It doesn't guarantee sudden enlightenment, but it offers something more honest, the chance to live truthfully, to face life as it is and still stay present, to breathe through the storm and still stay grounded, to watch the mind drift and still return. Whenever you feel lost, remember, the way back is always just one breath away. There's no distance between you and the now. Just sit, be still, and listen. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Crisis as an opportunity for sudden awakening. Not every answer needs words. Not every question expects a logical solution. On the Zen path, true awakening doesn't come through rational analysis. It comes through a shock of awareness, a collapse of logic, a moment when the ground of the mind disappears and something deeper is revealed. That's the purpose of the koan. At the heart of Zen tradition, a koan is a riddle, a paradox, an impossible question. It's not meant to be solved by the intellect. It's meant to break the intellect. One of the most well-known koans asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Your mind instantly wants to answer. It imagines the sound, guesses, compares, tries to get it right. But the koan isn't looking for a correct answer. It's meant to shake the structure of habitual thinking. It's an invitation, or better, a push, out of conventional thought. Zen, unlike other philosophical schools, doesn't seek progressive understanding or building systems of thought. It seeks awakening, direct, unfiltered, radical. And the koan is the strike that can pierce through the illusion. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. Yue, Zen's saying. This phrase is jarring, but it expresses a central Zen truth. Every image you create, every concept you form, no matter how sacred, is just a projection of the mind. And as long as you're stuck in your mind, you won't see what's real. That's why the koan doesn't inform, it transforms. It's a mirror that doesn't reflect your face, but your confusion. It forces you to confront the possibility that everything you think about life, the self, and reality might just be noise. But in that noise lies awakening. In Zen practice, a student receives a koan from their teacher, and they sit with it for days, weeks, even years. Not to solve it, but to experience the collapse of logic in its presence. And then, in an unexpected moment, it can happen. A sudden insight, a deep silence, a radical opening. no fireworks. The mind simply dissolves, and reality reveals itself. This experience is called Satori, sudden awakening. It's not the end of the journey, but a profound rupture, a direct glimpse of reality as it truly is, without filters, without concepts, without ego. The koan, then, works like a crisis does in life. It breaks the flow. It exposes the absurd. It shows that trying to control life with ideas is often the very thing that keeps us from being free. The question, what is the sound of one hand clapping, can't be answered. It must be lived. It becomes an inner tension, a wound that won't heal, until the thinking self finally lets go. And when effort ends, the sound appears, not in your ears, but in a consciousness freed from form. This kind of experience can't be explained. If you can explain it, it's no longer Zen. Zen begins where language fails. It begins when you're exhausted from trying to understand, and instead, you just feel reality. Before studying Zen, mountains are mountains. While studying Zen, mountains are no longer mountains. After awakening, mountains are mountains again. Zen proverb: the koan takes you from the first stage to the second. It pulls you out of the comfort zone of certainty. It dismantles you. It forces you to realize that what you call reality is a construction of the mind. And when that construction collapses, you see the world for the first time, without separation, without thought, without name. That's why Zen is called the pathless path. It has no fixed doctrines. It offers no final answers. It offers the silence of now, and the koan is the breaking point that opens that now in its fullness. Being lost in this context might be the beginning of awakening, when the old ways of thinking no longer work, when no answer satisfies, when everything feels absurd, incoherent, empty. That's when Zen enters, not to give you new answers, but to show you that the questions were being asked the wrong way. The koan isn't a word game, it's a mirror of the mind in conflict. And when you face it truly, with no rush, no expectations, you begin to see, not with your eyes, but with whatever it is that sees, even when your eyes are closed. Crisis, like the koan, can be what breaks the cycle of repetition, what opens a crack in the autopilot, what reveals the artificial self that's always trying to control everything. And in that rupture, life might show itself in a new way, alive, formless, nameless, but deeply, unmistakably present. Zen doesn't say, follow this path. It says, forget all paths. It doesn't say, find the answer. It says, be the question itself. And in that living experience, you don't discover something new. You simply awaken to what was always here. Not being, not non-being, starting over requires letting go of rigid black and white thinking. Rigidity is what holds us back. The need to define, affirm, deny, control. We want life to fit neatly into opposites, right and wrong, light and dark, being or not being. But reality, as it truly is, doesn't fit into fixed categories. That's what Nagarjuna, the great Indian philosopher from the 2nd century, tried to show. He didn't offer final answers or a closed system of ideas. He offered a blade, sharp, silent, and precise, to cut through the illusions of dualistic thinking. And with it, he pointed to a new way of seeing, the middle way. Nagarjuna is the central figure of the Madhyamaka school of Mahayana Buddhism. His philosophy revolves around a word that's both powerful and widely misunderstood: shunyata, emptiness. All things are empty of an independent self. Emptiness isn't absence, it's not denial. Emptiness means interdependence. Nothing exists by itself, independently, or in isolation. Everything arises in relation to everything else. Everything is empty of inherent existence, meaning nothing has a fixed core or essence. This insight challenges how we usually think, clinging to solid identities. I am this. This is good. That is bad. But from Nagarjuna's point of view, these labels are just mental constructions, useful, but ultimately illusions. Being is an illusion, non-being too. The wise cling to neither. Nagarjuna. He wasn't preaching nihilism or saying nothing matters. He was freeing the mind from the traps of rigid concepts, the very concepts that create suffering. Rigidity comes from believing things are what they seem. We suffer because we think the self is fixed, that our emotions are absolute truths, that the world should match our expectations. But everything changes, everything flows, and the more we try to lock reality into rigid ideas, the more it slips away, and the more lost we feel. Emptiness offers another path. Accept that reality is flexible, alive, ever-changing, and that thought can never fully capture it. This is Nagarjuna's middle way, not clinging to absolute existence, eternalism, not denying existence altogether, nihilism, but walking a path between extremes, understanding that everything exists dependently, temporarily, and in relation to everything else. This isn't just a philosophical concept, it's transformational, because it invites us to let go of the weight of needing certainty. It shows that suffering often comes not from life itself, but from our rigid interpretations of it. Whatever arises through causes and conditions is said to be empty, and being empty is merely a dependent designation. This is the middle way. Nagarjuna. When we see that everything is like an echo, arising from conditions and fading over time, we learn to relate to life more lightly, without clinging, without aversion, without resistance. In this sense, emptiness becomes the foundation of compassion, because if everything is interconnected, then nothing is truly separate from us. And if nothing is fixed, then everyone, including us, can change. We can begin again. But to truly begin again, we have to let go of our old habit of thinking in either-or terms. The dualistic mind wants to choose sides, to lock things in. But real renewal happens when the mind becomes quiet and starts seeing beyond opposing pairs. It's no longer, am I strong or weak? It becomes, I am a flow of experiences, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, never fixed. It's not did I win or fail, it becomes, I lived, I learned, and now I move forward with more clarity. Nagarjuna offers us a key to dealing with crisis. Let go of your attachment to identity. Let go of the search for absolute answers. Let go of the belief that you need to define life in order to live it. Emptiness isn't a dark void, it's a fertile space of possibility. Because nothing is locked in, everything can be transformed. And that understanding is deeply freeing. It's possible to love without clinging. It's possible to act without attaching your ego to every action. It's possible to exist without getting stuck in a fixed idea of who you are. Freedom doesn't come from being something. It comes from not needing to be something permanent. And that freedom begins when we stop trying to force reality to fit our molds. The middle way is a lighter walk. No comforting illusions, but also no despair. No eternal certainties, but a quiet confidence that simply being alive is already enough. Even without understanding everything, even without controlling anything, being lost in this light might be the first step. Because what was lost was the illusion of rigid certainty, and the emptiness that remains isn't absence, it's space. Space to see, to feel, to breathe, to begin again. Emptiness teaches us that life isn't a solid object. It's an open process, and the self isn't an isolated thing. It's a web of changing relationships. To accept this isn't to disappear. It's to appear more truthfully, more lightly, more real. Starting over means letting go of ready-made paths and discovering the truth for yourself. Most people look for a map, a doctrine, a philosophy, a method, something that tells them where to go, what to think, how to live. But Jiddu Krishnamurti, one of the most free and radical thinkers of the 20th century, challenged all of that. He broke away from religions, traditions, and spiritual teachers, even from the organization that was created to raise him as a global leader. His most famous statement cuts through everything. Truth is a pathless land. That means there is no safe road, no flawless teacher, no system that can take you to the truth. Truth, for Krishnamurti, can only be discovered directly by each person, with no middlemen, and the very act of following a path is already a distraction, because to follow is to imitate. It's a disorienting idea. We live surrounded by formulas, self-knowledge in 5 steps, beginner's spirituality, habits to change your life. But Krishnamurti said that any predefined path kills fresh perception, and without that fresh, unconditioned new way of seeing, the truth can't be seen. To follow someone is to deny truth. For him, real transformation starts with denial. Denying the traditions that shape your thoughts. Denying gurus, saviors, spiritual authorities. Denying the past as a lens to interpret the present. But this denial isn't shallow rebellion. It's a deep act of freedom. Because only when the mind lets go of what it knows can it truly see what is. Not what should be. Not what it hoped to find. But what's right in front of it. Raw, silent, real. Krishnamurti didn't offer a new belief system. He offered a state of total awareness, watching without choosing, looking without filtering, listening without comparing. That kind of attention is the real revolution, because it dissolves the structure of the self that's always judging, analyzing, chasing something. It breaks the cycle of repetition, and in that break, something new can emerge. Observation is action. You don't have to plan your change or decide what steps to take. You just need to see clearly, and the shift happens naturally, not through effort, but as a consequence of touching truth. But that takes courage, because to see clearly also means seeing the inner chaos, seeing your fears, your masks, your patterns, seeing how deeply conditioned every thought, reaction, and emotion is. Krishnamurti says we are all conditioned by our culture, our family, our religion, our language. Everything we think is ours might just be an echo of something we were taught. And real change, real starting over, means going beyond all of that, not repeating, not imitating, not following, discovering. But how can you discover anything new if you're already clinging to ready-made answers? How can you see what's new if you're trapped in what's old? That's why Krishnamurti insists, unlearn, empty yourself, observe. There's no how-to guide for this, because every method is a trap. What he offers instead is an invitation. Be present with all that you are right now. See with your own eyes. Think with your own mind. Feel with a heart that's truly free. That kind of freedom is the key. But it's not the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the freedom to be who you truly are, without fear, without comparison, without trying to fit in. A mind that is free from fear is a mind that can love. And for Krishnamurti, love and truth are inseparable. Not romantic love, not possessive love, but the love that sees others as part of yourself. The kind of love that grows from deep compassion and the realization that we're not truly separate. That kind of love can't be taught. It only shows up when the self goes quiet. And that inner silence, without escape, without ideals, without control, is the space where new life begins. Feeling lost, in this context, isn't a mistake. It's a sign that the old formulas no longer work, that the safe paths have led to dead ends, that something inside you refuses to keep pretending. And that refusal, that no, can be the beginning of real freedom. Because when you stop following someone else's path, you finally begin to hear your own truth. And it doesn't come in words. It comes in silence. It comes from deeply listening to life itself. It comes when the mind stops interfering and starts perceiving. Truth is not outside you and not inside you. It's where thought is not. Starting over, then, isn't about taking a new direction. It's about stopping the habit of direction altogether. It's being fully present with what is. It's letting life reveal its meaning on its own, without effort, without interference, without judgment. This is the path that isn't a path. This is the land with no trails, no signs, no guides. But it's also the land where something real, finally, can grow. Pain as a doorway to love and self-discovery. There are pains we can't explain, wounds that don't seem to heal, losses that silence the soul. But for Jalal ad-Din Rumi, a 13th century poet and mystic, every pain is a calling, not toward despair, but toward awakening. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Rumi. This simple line holds centuries of wisdom. In the heart of Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam to which Rumi belonged, God isn't a distant concept. He's an intimate presence, burning and alive, often revealed through pain. For Rumi, life's breaks, falls, emptiness, abandonment aren't punishments. They are invitations, openings, opportunities to reconnect with something deeper, with divine love, with the self that exists beyond appearances. In this view, the wound isn't the end, it's the beginning, because it's in absence that we feel the value of what's real. It's in the silence of loss that we hear the voice of the heart. It's in the depths of pain that the layers of ego tear away, and something purer can emerge. Don't run away from pain. Embrace it. The cure is in it. Rumi. This way of seeing contradicts our modern urge to avoid suffering at all costs. We numb ourselves with distractions, with speed, with denial. But Rumi says pain shouldn't be ignored. It should be listened to, because within pain, there's a message, there's meaning, and most of all, there's a chance to transform. Rumi spoke of love, but not of surface level or romantic love. He spoke of love that burns, that consumes, that dissolves the self. Love that comes from God and returns to Him. A love that can only be found when the small, wounded, proud, or lost self finally surrenders. Surrender is central to Sufism, not as passive submission, but as radical openness to truth. The truth of what you feel, the truth of who you are, the truth that needs no mask, and nothing shatters our masks like pain. You were born with wings, so why crawl through life? Rumi. That question comes from the wound, because pain reveals the contrast between what we've been conditioned to accept and who we truly are. Pain, in Rumi's eyes, is not the end of the road. It is the road itself. Through pain, we become more human, more compassionate, more aware, more real. Pain breaks down pride, control, and the illusion of separation. And in its place, love is born. Not love that needs someone else to exist, but love that rises from the center, from within, from the soul that remembers its divine origin. Love is the place where we fall into ourselves. Rumi. That fall is necessary, because most of the time we're living outside ourselves, lost in roles, routines, and ambitions that don't belong to us. But pain pulls us back. It forces us to look inward, and there we find something that can't be destroyed. That's what Rumi calls light. Not a light that avoids the darkness, but one that moves through it. A light that exists because there was shadow. In Sufism, God is often called the beloved, and every human is a seeker, a lover separated from their source, longing to return home. Life, then, isn't a straight line. It's a dance of meetings and partings, of rupture and reunion, and pain is one of the clearest ways the beloved calls the lover back to him. It's not the pain that destroys us, but the refusal to surrender to what it wants to show us. Rumi. In this light, to begin again is to accept the wound as a portal. It's to stop running and start listening. It's to let pain do its work, not to punish, but to reveal. Pain doesn't need to be romanticized. It can be raw, deep, and devastating. But if we move through it with awareness and openness, it won't just pass, it will transform. Rumi wrote thousands of verses on love, God, the soul, and mystical ecstasy. But behind all of them is the same timeless truth. The soul grows through the experience of losing and finding again, of hurting and loving, of breaking and healing. The wound, then, isn't the end of the road. It's the point where the road changes direction, where we stop walking only with our feet and begin walking with our hearts. This is the new beginning Rumi offers, a beginning that doesn't erase pain, but embraces it, transforms it, and turns it into light. Starting over can feel like waking up from a dream you didn't even know you were in. Zhuangzi once dreamed he was a butterfly. He fluttered freely, unaware he was Zhuangzi. But when he woke up, he wasn't sure. Was he a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming it was a man? Between Zhuangzi and the butterfly, there must be some distinction, but that's the kind of transformation we call the natural course of things. Zhuangzi. This image, so simple yet so profound, is one of the most famous in Taoist philosophy, and within it lies a powerful challenge to everything we think we know about identity. Who, or what, is the self? What's real? What if the life we're living is a kind of dream? Not a literal dream, but a version of reality shaped by beliefs, habits, and assumptions so old we mistake them for who we are. Zhuangzi doesn't give us answers. He gives us the mystery, and with it, the chance to be free. Zhuangzi's philosophy, written in 4th century BCE China, is rooted in Taoism. But unlike Laozi, who focused on the universal order, Zhuangzi dove into personal experience, how the mind builds barriers where there are no borders. His message is clear. Question everything you believe to be real, especially your idea of yourself. Because the self is a story, a tale we tell ourselves, built from memory, fear, and inherited ideas. But stories shift, just like dreams. The problem comes when we mistake the dream for reality. When we believe we are this fixed version of ourselves, with a name, a job, our past wounds and wants, and forget that all of this can change. The perfect person has no self. Zhuangzi. This isn't about erasing individuality. It's about softening the hard edges of our self-image. When you let go of needing to be someone, you become fluid, like the Tao. You stop resisting. You begin to live like a butterfly on the breeze, light, present, in harmony with the moment. According to Zhuangzi, suffering comes from trying to control, to cling, to define. We want to be right. We want to prove something. We want to matter. But in doing so, we separate ourselves from the natural flow of life. The Tao, the way, is not rigid. It doesn't reveal itself to the one who clings. It shows itself to the one who flows. The perfection of the Tao is like the wind, formless but present in all things. Zhuangzi. To start over, in this philosophy, is not to rebuild the self, but to let it fall away. It's to wake up from the dream where you were playing the role of someone and realize you don't need to keep performing. It's not easy, but it's freeing. Imagine everything you believe about yourself. Your strengths, your flaws, your convictions aren't your essence, but a dreamed-up version, a story that once helped you, but now feels too tight, like clothes that no longer fit. Zhuangzi doesn't ask you to fight this. He just invites you to observe. Notice how the mind reacts, how it creates divisions, me and them, right and wrong, good and bad, and then see those opposites for what they are, convenient, sure, but not truly real. The moment you realize you're dreaming is the moment you start to wake up. Crisis, on this path, can be that crack in the dream, when you feel out of place in the roles you've always played, when the things that once made sense don't anymore. That's the beginning of awakening. Zhuangzi doesn't offer techniques, no rules, no step-by-step plan. He gives you images, metaphors, stories. Because what needs to awaken isn't your intellect, it's your awareness. And awareness doesn't come through effort. It comes when the mind stops trying to control. Let the mind follow like a shadow follows the body. No effort, just return. Moni Zhuangzi. That return is the true new beginning, not a return to who you were, but a return to what was always there before you tried to be someone. To live like the dreaming butterfly is to allow yourself not to know, to accept that life is a play of changing forms, and that your role can shift without threatening who you truly are. Life doesn't ask for a solid identity. It asks for presence, lightness, surrender. In Zhuangzi's dream, he didn't choose to be a butterfly, but in the freedom of its flight, he found something more real than any label, the freedom to simply be. To wake up from that dream, or to stay in it with awareness, is one of the most radical acts you can do. It's realizing that even without certainty, you are alive, and that is enough. Facing your personal shadow is the first step toward true individuation and rebirth. Inside every human being, there's something unlived, unacknowledged, or unaccepted. It's what we hide from ourselves, what we reject out of fear, shame, or pride. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche formed by everything the ego denies. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. The shadow isn't just the bad or morally wrong side of our personality. It also holds repressed potential, forgotten desires, and denied creative power. Everything the ego can't admit as me gets pushed into the unconscious, but nothing actually disappears. The contents of the shadow continue to live on, acting beneath the surface. You see it in overreactions, in snap judgments, in self-sabotaging patterns you can't explain. Ignoring the shadow doesn't make it go away, it just makes it more dangerous. For Jung, the path to a mature soul, what he called individuation, requires that we face the shadow, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. Individuation is the process of becoming more than just a social mask or a shallow persona. It's the journey of becoming who you truly are, beneath the surface. And that only begins when we let go of the illusion of perfection. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Meeting the shadow isn't a poetic idea, it's a descent. A walk through the forgotten parts of the soul. A deep dive into the unconscious, where ancestral memories, archetypal symbols, and personal and collective traumas live. It takes courage, because the shadow reveals everything the ego refuses to face. The vanity behind generosity, the hunger for power behind compassion, the fear behind anger. But this recognition is where freedom begins, because as long as we keep projecting the shadow onto others, judging, fighting, pushing away, it still controls us from the dark. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is one of the deepest truths of Jungian psychology. True transformation doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from honestly confronting what's wounded. What's unconscious must be brought into the light, and for that, we must descend. This descent into the unconscious is archetypal. It shows up in myths, religions, and fairy tales. It's Orpheus going down to the underworld. It's Jonah inside the belly of the whale. It's the dark night of the soul. But for Jung, it's not just a symbol. It's real and necessary. The moment we face the shadow marks the end of naivete and the beginning of building a more honest, complex, and human self. The shadow, once seen, stops being an invisible enemy and becomes an ally in the journey toward authenticity. But integration doesn't mean doing whatever the shadow wants. It means accepting its presence, listening to its message, and giving it a conscious place in your life. This kind of listening requires discernment, but also compassion, because much of what lives in the shadow was born as protection. Our repressed traits often came from times when being vulnerable, spontaneous, or authentic felt dangerous. Facing the shadow also means welcoming what we were once forced to abandon. And in that embrace, the process of rebirth begins. The shadow, once recognized and integrated, becomes a source of renewal. True rebirth isn't just a surface-level reinvention, it's a return to wholeness. And wholeness includes both light and dark, the conscious and the unconscious, the beautiful and the conflicted. In Jung's language, this rebirth is the birth of the self, not as an idealized ego, but as the totality of the psyche, bringing opposites together. The self isn't something to be created, it's something to be discovered. It's already there, but fragmented and scattered. And the path of individuation is the journey of bringing those lost parts back home. Each part of the shadow that we integrate is a piece of ourselves returning to the center. And with that, our awareness deepens, our inner freedom grows, and our capacity to love, with maturity, expands. The shadow that once brought fear becomes a bridge. The pain that once felt destructive becomes a guide, and the unconscious, once rejected, becomes a source of wisdom. This is Jung's invitation: to face yourself, not to become perfect, but to become whole. Being lost on this path might be the sign that your old self can no longer hold your soul. The confusion, the crisis, the collapse of certainty. It might all be a call from the shadow, a call to go deeper, to see what was forgotten, to reclaim what was denied, and then to be reborn, not as someone who returns to who they were, but as someone who emerges from the journey with a more awakened heart, truly accepting life as it is, even the losses, the falls, and the heartbreak. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher of tragic courage, never believed in a life of safety. He didn't promise salvation, or eternal peace, or spiritual comfort. What he offered was far more difficult and infinitely more liberating. Love your fate. Love everything, even what hurt you. Love even the things that broke you. That's the meaning of amor fati, Latin for love of fate. But in Nietzsche's philosophy, it goes far beyond just accepting life. Amor fati is a radical yes to life as it is, with all its flaws, accidents, pain, and imperfections, and still saying yes. My formula for human greatness is amor fati, to not want anything to be different, not in the past, not in the future, not for all eternity. Nietzsche wrote those words after a life filled with chronic illness, deep loneliness, and rejection. He knew what pain was, but he also knew that fighting reality only makes suffering worse. That's why amor fati is not about resignation. It's not about putting up with things. It's about celebrating them. It's about turning every scar into a symbol of strength, every fall into part of your path, every loss into raw material for your soul. This philosophy is born from the deep understanding that life will not mold itself to our desires. It will break us. It will contradict us. It will challenge us. And we have to choose. Will we curse it, or will we transform it? Nietzsche chose transformation, but not in some idealistic or naive way. He approached life the way an artist approaches chaos, willing to give shape to the shapeless, to create meaning where none exists. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Nietzsche, Twilight of the Idols. That phrase isn't a shield against pain, it's a philosophy of redefinition. It means suffering can become strength, but only if we stop being its victims and instead become creators through it. Amor fati is the mindset of someone who knows they don't have total control, but still has creative power, not over what happens, but over how they show up in the face of it. Crisis, loss, disappointment, all of these can destroy us, but they can also wake us up. They can rebuild us with more depth, more presence, more truth. Nietzsche invites us to turn our pain into inner works of art, to forge, with the fire of hard experiences, a stronger soul, not stronger in the sense of being untouchable, but in the sense of being deeply alive. For there to be a great birth within, there must first be great chaos. To love your fate is not to say, it all happened for a reason. It's to say, it all happened, and it brought me here, and from here I can create something with it. Amor fati is an aesthetic stance toward life. Nietzsche believed that living is an art form, and great art must face tragedy, without surrendering to despair. That's why he stood so strongly against nihilism. The feeling that nothing means anything, that everything is empty, that pain is pointless. Nietzsche offers something else. Turn pain into meaning. Turn the fall into a dance. Turn loss into quiet strength. It's not easy. It takes maturity. It requires letting go of the victim mindset. It means looking back at failures, mistakes, collapses, and saying, yes, that's what happened, and now I live with it. I live from it. I love it. Loving your fate is the opposite of running away. It's giving up the hope that life will be fair, that people will understand you, that things will go back to how they were. It's looking at your own story, full of cracks and detours, and saying, this is my material. This is what I'll build with. Nietzsche compared the human being to a blacksmith, someone who shapes their own soul. And the fire that shapes us is often pain. But the hammer, that's our will, our creative force. The ability to say yes to everything that's happened, not because it was all good, but because to deny it would be to deny life itself. It's not a lack of love, but a lack of meaning that makes suffering unbearable. Nietzsche, to give something meaning doesn't mean to explain it away. It means turning what happened into part of your growth. It means realizing there's no leap without a fall, no light without shadow, no rebirth without death. Loving the fate that shattered you means understanding that even the break was part of your becoming. The becoming of who you are, after it all, after the loss, after the fall, after the disappointment. And that's when you begin again. Not from zero, but from the depths, with deeper roots, with more awakened eyes, with a soul that's learned to love even the inevitable. Even in the depths of suffering, it's possible to find meaning or create it. Viktor Frankl knew what it meant to lose everything. He knew what it meant to be ripped away from your life, your identity, even your name. He knew what it was like to watch loved ones destroyed before his eyes and still choose not to give up on his own humanity. Frankl survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, and from within that hell, he found his deepest conviction. No matter how much you lose, it's still possible to find meaning, or, if needed, to create it. Life never ceases to have meaning, even in the face of suffering, guilt, or death. This isn't a feel-good phrase. It's an existential philosophy forged in one of the most brutal human experiences imaginable. Frankl wasn't talking about some vague religious or metaphysical meaning. He meant something personal, real, concrete, a kind of meaning only you can discover for yourself. While his peers in psychology focused on pleasure, Freud, or power, Adler, Frankl offered something deeper. Human beings are driven by the search for meaning. And when we lose that sense of purpose, we also lose the will to live. His approach, called logotherapy, places meaning at the center of psychological health. But it doesn't offer easy answers. It demands an honest, ongoing question. What for? Not, why did this happen to me? But what can I do with what happened? In the concentration camps, Frankl saw this firsthand. The ones who survived weren't always the strongest. They were the ones who still had a reason to live, an ideal, a loved one, a dream, a vision of the future that gave meaning to the pain of the present. He who has a why can bear almost any how. That quote is the heart of Frankl's philosophy. Suffering, no matter how senseless it seems, doesn't have to be meaningless. It can become a call, a challenge, a spark that awakens a deeper response, a response filled with purpose. But let's be clear, Frankl never claimed suffering was good. He simply believed that when suffering is unavoidable, we still have one final freedom: the freedom to choose how we respond. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That inner freedom is what makes authentic rebirth possible. It doesn't mean pretending the pain isn't there. It means integrating the pain into the story you're still writing. It means seeing suffering as raw material for something deeper, truer, more human. Frankl said that during the darkest moments in the camps, he would imagine himself back in Vienna, giving lectures about the psychology of suffering. In his mind, he transformed pain into knowledge, and knowledge into service. It wasn't escapism, it was resilience with a purpose. That mental exercise, imagining a future full of meaning, helped him endure the present. And today, outside of the camps, the principle remains the same. The question isn't only, what did I lose? But, what can this pain teach me? What can I create from it now? Here, Frankl meets other existential thinkers, like Nietzsche and Camus, but with one crucial difference. Frankl believed that life always offers the chance to respond, even when the question is cruel, even when the answer is silent, even when the meaning isn't handed to us, but built from within. When suffering is lived with existential responsibility, it becomes a space for transformation. Not romanticized, not glorified, but transformed. And that's when a true new beginning becomes possible. When suffering is no longer just an obstacle, but part of the foundation for something new to grow. Man is the being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz, but he's also the one who walked into those chambers with his head held high and a prayer on his lips. This sentence captures the radical depth of his view of humanity. Yes, we are capable of destruction, but also of dignity, meaning, and transcendence. Frankl offers us an invitation to existential maturity, a maturity that understands not everything has a clear explanation, but everything can still carry meaning. And that meaning isn't found in books or abstract philosophy. It's lived in pain, in responsibility, in the courage to keep going, even when everything seems to fall apart. Suffering doesn't have to be the last word. It can be the first word of a new chapter. To begin again, in Frankl's view, is not to go back to who you were before the pain. It's to accept that the pain has changed you, and then live with purpose as this new version of yourself. The soul doesn't seek healing. It seeks to be heard. Feeling lost might actually be a calling from the psyche. In a time when everything has to be fixed, rushed, and optimized, James Hillman brought a bold and almost subversive perspective. Maybe the soul isn't asking to be healed. Maybe it just wants to be heard. Modern psychology often treats suffering as something that needs to be eliminated. Sadness, anxiety, confusion. Everything gets labeled as dysfunction. But Hillman asks, what if these states are legitimate expressions of the soul? What if feeling lost isn't a mistake, but a deep call from the psyche toward a different way of living? The soul is not sick. It's trying to speak. Hillman was the founder of archetypal psychology, an approach that breaks away from the traditional clinical model. He didn't see suffering as something to be fixed. He saw it as a message, as symbolic language, as living mythology. To him, every symptom has a soul. Every pain holds an image. Every crisis carries a story longing to be told. The problem is, we've forgotten how to listen. And when we ignore the soul, it starts to scream through anxiety, emptiness, and melancholy. Not because it wants a cure, but because it wants attention. For Hillman, the soul isn't some abstract thing. It's deeply imaginal. It moves through symbols, dreams, and metaphors. It speaks through subtle gestures, recurring memories, and impulses that defy logic. But modern culture has reduced everything to function. Being healthy became synonymous with being productive. Happiness became an obligation, and all pain was seen as dysfunction. In this context, feeling lost seems like failure. But Hillman teaches, getting lost might be the only way to rediscover depth. The collapse of a surface-level identity can be the very moment when the soul begins to emerge. We need a psychology that listens to the soul, not one that simply tries to silence its symptoms. This calls for a different kind of listening, a listening without rush, without judgment, without the anxious need to fix, solve, or correct. This kind of listening is radical because it doesn't assume something is wrong with you. It starts from the idea that something is trying to be born inside you, and you just don't know what it is yet. Crisis, in this sense, is a symbolic womb, a time for something new to take shape. And suffering is the inner movement of the soul, trying to reposition itself, shift form, and grow. But for that to happen, it needs to be heard. Hillman invites us to awaken psychological imagination, to not settle for clinical labels, rushed diagnoses, or one-size-fits-all solutions. Every soul has its own path, its own language, its own story. Modern psychology tries to tell us what's wrong with us. The soul wants to tell us who we really are. This doesn't mean abandoning treatment, but rather looking at pain with new eyes. Eyes that see depth where others only see dysfunction. For example, a period of sadness might be grief for the parts of yourself you've abandoned. Anxiety could be the reaction of a soul that can no longer stand a life without meaning. Anger might be the denied energy of an unlived desire. Hillman invites us to descend into the underworld of the soul, like Orpheus, who journeys into the depths, not to destroy, but to find what he loves. This descent is not depression, it's depth. It's the courage to stop chasing the light all the time, and realize that darkness has something to teach too. The path of listening requires time, silence, presence, and a sensitivity to symbols, dreams, and images. Because the soul doesn't speak in logical language. It speaks through stories, internal, unconscious, universal. It moves like myths, full of gods, monsters, heroes, falls, and rebirths. And at this point, Hillman aligns with the ancients. The soul is mythic, it's poetic, it's tragic, and it must be treated with reverence. Being lost in this context is not pathological. It's archetypal. It's part of the journey of every human being who dares to go beyond the surface. The soul sometimes needs to disorient you to pull you out of autopilot. It needs to collapse old structures to make room for the unexpected. And that doesn't happen on society's schedule. The soul doesn't follow the calendar of productivity. It moves in its own rhythms, in inner seasons, in silences that heal. The deep self doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be understood. And that understanding isn't rational. It's symbolic. It's emotional. It's aesthetic. It's the act of sitting with your own pain and asking, what do you want to tell me? This listening by itself already transforms, because it creates space. Space for the soul to be what it is, without masks, without function, without judgment. And it's in that space that a new beginning can happen. Not as a return to the old self, but as the birth of a self that's wider, truer, and more whole. To start over, for Hillman, is to stop trying to fix yourself like a broken product and begin listening to yourself as a being in metamorphosis. The soul doesn't want efficiency, it wants depth, and sometimes you only find that by getting lost. Emotional rigidity blocks any new beginning. To disarm the body is to disarm the soul. Wilhelm Reich was one of the most provocative thinkers in 20th century psychology, a student of Freud in the beginning, but far more radical in his views of the human soul. Reich dared to say, the body speaks, and it holds on. It holds on to trauma, repression, fear, and shame, not just in the mind, but in the muscles themselves. For Reich, the soul isn't separate from the body. You can't talk about inner transformation without looking at the physical structure you've become. Because your body is the visible form of your character, and your character is a kind of emotional armor that has shaped itself over a lifetime. This armor is invisible to the eye, but shows up in how you breathe, how you walk, how you clench your jaw or cross your arms. It's your emotional biography carved into tight muscles and guarded movements. Character is an armor that protects, but also imprisons. Reich called this the muscular armor or character armor. It's how you defend yourself from pain, from love, from vulnerability. And every layer of that tension is a form of protection, but also a form of self-abandonment. Because constantly protecting yourself means you're not fully living. It means blocking the flow of life. It means freezing emotions just to stay in control. And control, very often, is the biggest obstacle to starting over. When someone says they feel stuck, like they can't change or feel trapped, there's a good chance that prison isn't just mental, it's in the body. That's why Reich insisted, to free the mind, you have to free the body. And to free the body, you have to listen to its silent language. Shallow breathing, tight lower back, tense shoulders, clenched fists. All of that is the body's way of coping with the unbearable. But over time, those responses stop being temporary and turn into patterns, and those patterns become a cage. Where there is tension, there is unprocessed emotion. The armor is your body trying to avoid old pain, but in the process, it also blocks pleasure, love, touch, flow, and the ability to start again. To disarm the armor doesn't mean living without protection. It means learning how to feel again, to breathe again, to be present in your body again. Because when the body is numb, the soul can't move. To Reich, the experiences you couldn't fully process, trauma, fear, repressed desire, get stored in the body. And that shapes your character. You become hard, controlling, closed off, emotionally unavailable, and you start believing that's who you really are. But it's not. It's what you had to become in order to survive. The problem is, over time, that defense stops serving you and becomes your prison. It protects you so well that it no longer lets anything or anyone touch you. Life energy can only flow where the body is free. So to truly start over, you have to go to the roots, to the foundation, to the physical and emotional ground beneath your feet. And that begins with reconnecting to your real body. Not the one filtered by social media, not the one disconnected by overthinking, but the living body, with its history, its tension, its scars. The body you inhabit today is the result of everything you weren't able to fully process. It's the sum of unspoken no's, swallowed tears, and silenced desires. But that body isn't broken. It's alive. It's adaptable. It can release what it's been holding on to. That's why Reich believed in the power of body-based therapy, deep breathing, muscle release, and sensory reconnection. Because only when the body lets go, the soul can return. Letting go isn't losing control. It's regaining your natural rhythm. It's allowing life to move through you again, without fear of feeling. It's very common that when this armor starts to loosen, emotions resurface. Old tears, forgotten anger, frozen fears. And that's all part of real healing. Not the kind that fixes you, but the kind that brings all of you back together. The function of a rigid character is to avoid pain, but it also blocks pleasure. When you begin to disarm the body, you start accessing inner spaces that have been quiet for far too long. The soul doesn't want to be repaired. It wants space. It wants to be heard. It wants a body that's present and available. And that body doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be alive, to be sensitive, to be real. Starting over in this path means feeling at home in your own skin again. It means dissolving tension that once protected you, but now suffocates you. It means learning to breathe deeply, not just air, but life. That armor may have served you for a long time, but maybe now it's time to say thank you and let it go. Because underneath it all, your soul is just waiting to dance again. The body holds the trauma. Starting over requires both the body and the mind. Trauma isn't just what happened to you, it's what happened inside you because of what you went through. And often that doesn't fade with time. On the contrary, it stays stuck in the body, in the tension in your shoulders, in the tightness in your chest, in the shallow breathing, in the restless sleep, in the upset stomach, in the emotional silence that feels normal, but isn't. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, shows us that trauma isn't just a memory. It's an unprocessed experience that stays alive in your nervous system. It's like the body is still stuck in the past, even if your mind is trying to move on. Trauma is not just an event from the past. It's a reality lived in the present, through the body, day after day. Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Gabor Mate, another expert in trauma and mental health, goes even deeper. There's no real separation between body and mind. What hasn't been felt, expressed, or understood emotionally shows up physically. And that's not weakness, it's survival. Trauma doesn't live in the event, it lives in the disconnection it caused, inside of you. Gabor Mate. Trauma, then, isn't just about what hurt us. It's about how we disconnect from ourselves in order to cope. And that disconnection is exactly what makes starting over so difficult. To truly begin again, with presence, honesty, and freedom, we have to bring the body into the process. A lot of times, we think it's enough to just understand what happened to us, but the mind might understand, while the body still reacts like it's in danger. Have you ever tried to change something in yourself, and even with awareness and effort, you just couldn't? That's the power of unresolved trauma. It doesn't follow logical time. It follows the body's time, deeper, slower, more primal. That's why modern trauma research points to one clear direction. Healing begins in the body, not just with words, but with sensations, movement, breathing, touch, and presence. The body needs to feel safe again. Only then can it come out of its constant state of alert and begin to open space for real change. Bessel van der Kolk observed, after decades of research, that traumatized people often feel disconnected from their bodies. They leave the body because it became a place of pain. But that disconnection has a cost. It also cuts off joy, pleasure, and spontaneity. Healing is not about forgetting trauma. It's about reintegrating the parts of the body and soul that were shattered just to survive. Gabor Mate adds, many symptoms we see as illness, chronic anxiety, depression, eating disorders, even some autoimmune conditions, are actually expressions of unrecognized trauma. It's not the body's fault, it's the body sending a message. When you silence your pain, the body speaks. When you ignore the body, it screams. Gabor Mate. So the real question isn't, what's wrong with me? It's, what happened to me? And how is my body still trying to deal with that today? This shift in question changes everything. It moves us from judgment to compassion. And compassion, according to both authors, is what truly heals. Not just external compassion, but self-compassion. The kind that learns to listen to the body without rushing. The kind that respects the time it takes to heal. That recognizes that rigidity was once protection, but now it's time to soften. For someone carrying trauma, starting over doesn't mean jumping into a new version of yourself. It means gathering the broken pieces with care. It means rebuilding a sense of safety. It means coming back to the body, like coming home. That return can happen in many ways. Somatic therapies, where the body leads the healing process, conscious breathing, to release deep tension, yoga, meditation, therapeutic touch, anything that restores connection, artistic expression, where the body speaks through images and gestures. There's no single path, but one condition is always true. The body has to be included. The mind may move fast, But the body needs time. It needs trust. It needs to be heard. And when that happens, when the body starts to relax, to breathe deeper, to feel safe again, the soul also starts to come back. Creativity returns. The desire to live reawakens. Spontaneity, buried for years, begins to bloom. Trauma is the loss of connection to yourself. Healing is the return to presence. Gabor Mate. That's why starting over must include the body. Through the comforting touch. Through the breath that calms. Through the gesture that expresses itself without fear. The body isn't the obstacle, it's the path. And often, it's the body that will show you where it still hurts. And also where you can begin again. Where there's crisis, there's also a chance to subvert the narratives of control. Michel Foucault wasn't a philosopher interested in certainty. He wasn't looking for eternal truths or metaphysical comfort. His focus was on examining the invisible structures, the subtle mechanisms, the hidden systems that shape who we are, often without us even noticing. And through this critical lens on modernity, Foucault revealed something essential. Crisis isn't just collapse. It can also be an opening, a real chance for disruption, for subversion, for freedom. What interests me is how the subject is gradually formed through practices of subjection. Michel Foucault. For Foucault, we're not simply autonomous individuals freely choosing who we want to be. We are shaped by discourses, institutions, and social norms that influence us from birth. Medicine, education, religion, sexuality, madness, prison. All of these are systems of power that define what's normal, what's healthy, what's acceptable. But power doesn't just act through violence or censorship. It works, above all, in subtle ways, leading us to internalize the rules ourselves. And so, we end up policing ourselves, staying within boundaries we don't even realize are there. The result? Rigid identities. Tamed subjectivities, people living correct lives without ever questioning where those definitions came from. That's where crisis becomes valuable, because it shakes things up, it breaks the routine, it disrupts the normal, and in that breakdown, it forces us to see what was previously invisible. Crisis is the moment when the field of possibility reopens. Michel Foucault. When a structure begins to collapse, whether external or internal, it creates a crack. A space where we can question the narrative, re-examine our certainties, and maybe begin to recreate ourselves. Crisis can be personal, an emotional breakdown, the end of a relationship, a loss of identity. It can be collective, political upheaval, cultural shifts, civilizational breakdowns. But in every case, it disrupts control. And that's exactly where there's room for subversion. To subvert, in Foucault's view, doesn't just mean rebellion. It's more subtle than that. It means exposing the systems of power that once seemed natural and revealing that other ways of living are possible. That's why every crisis carries a liberating potential. Not because it gives easy answers, but because it makes clear that the old answers no longer work. This is a political view, but also an existential one, because each of us carries within the very forms of power we've learned to reproduce. We monitor ourselves, we judge ourselves, we control ourselves, and when something breaks, when a crisis shakes us, we get the chance to see it all more clearly. That's what Foucault meant by the ethical possibility of crisis. It's not just suffering, it's an invitation to reinvent ourselves, to shape a new aesthetic of the self. Maybe philosophical work today should begin not with theory, but with the practice of the self. Michel Foucault. This practice of the self isn't self-help. It's a rigorous and courageous exercise in questioning who we are, how we got here, and what we're capable of becoming. Because we are not finished subjects, we are processes, and where there is process, there is possibility. In that sense, starting over is not about returning to who we once were. It's about trying out new ways of being, new ways of feeling, of desiring. of existing, and that requires breaking from habit, from automatic living, from the idea that this is just the way it is. So, crisis can be a turning point, a wound that reveals the hidden forces shaping our behavior, a chance to let go of certain inner obediences. For example, the idea that you have to be productive all the time, the belief that success has only one definition, the pressure to fit in just to be loved. Where did these ideas come from? Who taught you to monitor yourself like this? Who decided that this was the right way to live? Foucault's philosophy doesn't offer comfort. It offers tools. Tools to help you see, with clarity, honesty, and strength, what's shaping you and why. And once you see it, you begin to recover something essential, the freedom to become someone else, not as someone who burns everything down in chaos, but as someone who uses crisis as a lever for conscious transformation. Where there is power, there is resistance. Michel Foucault. That resistance doesn't need to be loud. It can be quiet, but deep. Like saying no to what no longer makes sense. Like refusing to keep repeating inherited patterns. Like choosing to create a new way of life, one that feels more true to who you're becoming now. Starting over, in this context, isn't going back. It's reinvention. Crisis pulls you out of your comfort zone, but it also breaks the invisible chains. And in the space it opens up, you can stop being just an object of the norms and begin becoming the subject of your own choices. It's not what happens to us that affects us. It's how we think about it. A lot of people believe they're unhappy because of what happened to them, because of what they lost, what they didn't get, what someone said or didn't say. But according to Albert Ellis, that's not how reality works. It's not the events themselves that disturb us. It's our interpretation of those events. This is the foundation of rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, one of the most influential approaches in modern psychology, and one of the most liberating. Because if it's not the facts that make us suffer, but the way we think about the facts, then we have some control. There's room for choice, for change, for a fresh start. People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. This idea, while modern, has roots in ancient Stoicism, especially in Epictetus. Ellis brought that wisdom into clinical practice and made it clear that much of our emotional suffering comes from irrational thinking. Not irrational in the sense of being crazy, but irrational because it's distorted, extreme, and rigid. It's those inner voices that say, I have to be perfect. Everyone must like me. If something goes wrong, it means I'm a failure. I can't handle this. Nothing will ever get better. Thoughts like these, while common, only add to our pain. They don't reflect reality. They distort it. They don't help us. They trap us. And here's the core of Ellis's message. It's not enough to just change how we feel. We have to change how we think. Emotion follows thought. If our thoughts are irrational, our emotions will be intense, distorted, and unmanageable. But if our thinking is grounded, flexible, and realistic, then our emotions can be felt in a healthier, lighter, more constructive way. You feel the way you think. This doesn't mean we deny our feelings. It means we trace them back to their source, our thoughts. We start asking, is this true? Is this logical? Is this helping me or hurting me? Most of the time, we're suffering not because of what happened, but because of the story we told ourselves about it. Something real occurred, but our minds created a much worse narrative, and we believed it. That story becomes a cycle: distorted thoughts, intense emotions, impulsive reactions, more suffering. Ellis invites us to break that cycle, not with toxic positivity, but with emotional responsibility. It's the courage to say, okay, this happened, but what am I telling myself about it? Is that fair? Is it realistic? Is it healthy? This shift in mindset is what Ellis called rational acceptance of the present. It's learning to accept life as it is, not as we think it should be, because most suffering comes from the shoulds. People should treat me better. I should be more successful. Life should be fair. I shouldn't feel this way. But reality doesn't care about our shoulds. And the more attached we are to them, the more anxious, resentful, and frustrated we become. Rational acceptance is not giving up. It's clarity. It's saying, this is how things are. Now, what can I do with that? This kind of acceptance is freeing because it takes us out of victim mode and puts us in the driver's seat of our emotional response. You may not control what happens to you, but you can learn to choose how you respond. You can reframe your thoughts, challenge destructive beliefs, and rebuild the way you see yourself and the world. It takes practice, repetition, inner work, but it's possible and powerful because slowly you stop being ruled by rigid thoughts and you begin to develop emotional and mental flexibility. You start to say, I wish it were different, but I can handle this. This is not the end of the world. It's uncomfortable, but it's not unbearable. Things don't have to be perfect to have value. Those inner shifts create real relief, not because the world changed, but because your relationship to the world did. And that's what makes a conscious new beginning possible. A fresh start that doesn't depend on everything being fixed, but begins with the choice to think in a healthier, kinder, more grounded way. Accept reality, change your thinking, free yourself from emotional torture. Albert Ellis reminds us that we are not prisoners of our minds. We are active participants in our inner world, and learning to think better is one of the most powerful ways to heal from the inside out. Starting over means letting go of the logic of consumption and rediscovering what it means to truly be. We live in a culture that taught us to measure our lives by what we own. Our identity seems to depend on the car we drive, the house we live in, the clothes we wear, and the things we manage to accumulate. But according to psychoanalyst and philosopher Erich Fromm, this way of thinking is the root of deep human alienation. In his 1976 book, To Have or To Be, Fromm presents a powerful distinction. There are two fundamental ways of living. One is based on having, which seeks security, status, and control. The other is based on being, which seeks presence, authenticity, and connection to the essence of life. Modern society promised freedom and happiness, but what it delivered was an emptiness filled with things. Erich Fromm, the culture of having is seductive. It offers comfort, instant pleasure, and social approval, but it also traps us, because when you believe you are what you own, every loss becomes a threat to your very existence. You live in constant fear, fear of losing, fear of not having enough, fear of not being someone. Fromm saw this as a deep impoverishment of the human spirit. We've traded our inner freedom for a never-ending list of external obligations. We live to maintain what we've acquired, even if it costs us our mental health, our relationships, and our time. And maybe without even realizing it, we become disconnected from ourselves. Modern man thinks he loses something, time, money, power, when he's doing nothing. But it's exactly in that nothing where he might rediscover himself. The being mode of life, on the other hand, doesn't require possessions. It requires presence. It asks for a deep awareness of the moment, our relationships, our emotions, and the inner questions that truly matter. It's a way of living that values the process more than the outcome, experience more than objects, the human being more than their resume. But living this way isn't easy. We've been conditioned to tie our self-worth to material success. So when things fall apart, when we lose a job, a relationship, a social position, it feels like we disappear too. That's where Fromm's philosophy becomes essential for anyone starting over. Because it reminds us there is life beyond what we own and freedom beyond what we can control. To start fresh in this deeper sense is to break free from the idea that we are what we possess. It's about giving ourselves permission to undo, to empty out, to make space. It's asking not, how much do I have, but who am I? Fromm believed that as long as we stay stuck in the having mindset, we become anxious, competitive, and shallow. We fear others because they might take what we have. But in the being mindset, the other is no longer a threat. They're an invitation. Love, for example, is not something you own. It's something you experience. A space of surrender, of sharing, of opening to the other as they are, not as an object of desire, but as a living presence. Mature love says, I need you because I love you, not I love you because I need you. Erich Fromm, The Art of Loving. The same principle applies to work, friendship, and spirituality. In the having mode, everything is a tool. In the being mode, everything is a relationship with the world, with the self, with life as experience. But entering this new way of living takes courage. Courage to question what we've been taught about success. Courage to sit with the emptiness that comes when we stop consuming. Courage to search for meaning, not just distractions. Fromm wasn't romanticizing poverty or preaching extreme renunciation. What he criticized was the fetish of possession, the illusion that accumulating more makes us more human. He knew that true transformation doesn't begin with external achievement, but with a shift in how we relate to the world around us. And that shift begins within, in how we think, in what we prioritize, in our ability to sit in silence and ask, who am I? Without titles, without accomplishments, without performance. To live in the being mode is to accept that life is impermanent, that everything we own can change, but what we are, if it runs deep enough, remains. It's about finding freedom not in control, but in surrender, not in stability, but in awareness, not in consumption, but in care. Fromm warns us, the more you try to fill yourself with things from the outside, the more empty you'll feel on the inside. And maybe that emptiness you feel isn't a lack of material things, but a lack of connection to your true self. To be means to be deeply connected to life, to others, to yourself, not to things. This is why starting over requires an act of letting go of the idea that your worth is tied to what you own, and rediscovering the quiet value of simply being with honesty, being with awareness, being with freedom. The being way of life is simpler, but it's not shallow. It's radical, because it returns us to who we are at our core. Not what we buy, but what we live. Not what we achieve, but what we express. Not what we accumulate, but what we share. Life is marked by pain, and a fresh start might come from choosing not to feed the blind will that controls us. Few philosophers have looked at human suffering as honestly as Arthur Schopenhauer. Far from the optimistic promises of progress or the Western ideas of redemption and glory, he said something most people would rather avoid. Suffering isn't an accident in life. It's the very structure of existence. This isn't pessimism in the shallow sense of the word. Schopenhauer wasn't a nihilist. He didn't say nothing has value, but he did say, with sharp clarity, that life is a constant tension between wanting and not having, and having and fearing to lose. And in that endless cycle, suffering is inevitable. Life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Arthur Schopenhauer, The World as Will and Representation for Schopenhauer, what drives all living beings, including us, is a blind, irrational force he called the will. This will is pure desire, the urge to exist, to conquer, to reproduce, to keep going. But it's never satisfied, because every time one desire is fulfilled, another shows up right behind it. We want something. We suffer because we don't have it. We get it. We suffer because it doesn't last. We lose it. We suffer again. In that cycle, peace is rare, and pleasure is just a brief pause between two waves of pain. This view might sound dark, and it is, but it can also be freeing if you're brave enough to face it. Because Schopenhauer isn't saying life is only pain. He's saying that as long as we live as slaves to our desires, we'll never really be free. The will, that force pushing us to always want more, is the real prison. And starting over, from this perspective, isn't about chasing new desires, new dreams, or new wins. It's about breaking the illusion that happiness comes from satisfying those desires. Man is free to do what he wills, but not to will what he wills. Schopenhauer. In other words, you can choose your actions, but you don't choose your inner urges. They come from the will, and the will is insatiable. That's why Schopenhauer saw renunciation as the only path to a life with less suffering. But be careful. Renunciation doesn't mean rejecting life. It means understanding it deeply. It's saying no to illusion, no to vanity, no to the endless chase for something that's always out of reach. It's a no to blind desire and a yes to inner stillness. This philosophy is actually very close to Eastern wisdom, especially Buddhism. For both, desire is the root of suffering, and freedom comes from letting go of that constant craving. Schopenhauer saw artists, mystics, and wise people as those who could, even briefly, rise above the will. The artist, when fully absorbed in a beautiful work, doesn't want, they just observe. The wise person, when meditating on life, isn't seeking power or glory, they just understand. The mystic, when dissolving into the whole, lets go of the self that desires and finds peace. These aren't forms of escape. They're deep acts of resistance against the will's grip. And this is where starting over becomes possible, not by changing your circumstances, but by changing your relationship with life. When you realize that suffering is part of being alive, it stops being a mistake. It stops being something to avoid at all costs, and starts being something you can understand, embrace, and move through. Renunciation, in this sense, isn't giving up. It's wisdom. It's realizing that the more you try to hold on to life, the more it slips away, and the more you let go, the freer you become. Happiness is negative. It is the absence of pain. Schopenhauer. That line sums up his view well. The full, intense, lasting happiness the world promises. It's an illusion, but peace, silence, lightness, that's possible. And it doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from what you stop trying to control. To Schopenhauer, starting over doesn't mean reigniting your will with new wants. It means realizing that what you're chasing outside, security, peace, wholeness, can only be found inside. And that only happens when you accept life as it is, without the filters, with its tragic beauty, with its impermanence, with its inevitable pain, and its deep mystery. Because when you stop running from pain, it starts to shift. And in that quiet space, where the will no longer screams, the soul can rest, can breathe, can finally just be. Thank you so much for staying until the end. If this content resonated with you, touched you in some way, or sparked new questions, then I invite you to keep walking this path with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Here, we dive deep without fear of life's complexity. Like the video if it brought you any meaningful reflection. Leave a comment below. What stood out to you the most? Which of these ideas will you carry with you? And if you know someone who's looking for a fresh start, share this video with them. Sometimes, just one idea can light a new spark. And of course, stick around. There are many other videos on the channel waiting for you. Each one is an invitation to think, to feel, and maybe to find yourself a little more. See you in the next one.